Chapter 601, Overwhelming. It was only a few dozen meters to the battlefield, and Nathan and his squad closed the gap in an instant. The mist shinobi still standing there showed no sign of retreat, at least not until Nathan and his teammates arrived. They'd heard the thunder of blades and chakra not far off, and suspected that Konoha's support outmatched the two squads they'd already tangled with. But defeat had never entered their minds. After all, they'd brought two full Kirigakure Jonin teams to the fight. Their confidence proved disastrous. True, Konoha had sent just one Jonin, but he wasn't ordinary. Nathan was the rarest breed of shinobi, an elite among elites. In moments, he tore through both Kirigakure squads. Stunned by his speed and precision, the remaining mist ninja couldn't mount a defense or flee. Kawada Yuhiro had slipped away so swiftly that no warning bell rang for his comrades. Stranded and leaderless, they found themselves abandoned on the field. When Nathan and his team strode into view, the expressions on the mist Genin's faces shifted from overconfidence to outright horror. In an instant, the tide of battle had turned. The four Kirigakure captains exchanged a single, knowing glance before one of them barked, "Retreat!" In an instant, they slipped into the dense forest shadows. Behind them, the remaining mist shinobi scrambled to follow, but they were too slow. Within moments, Konoha's boarding party closed in, blades clashing in fierce combat. Clang, clang, clang! High above the fray, Nathan perched on a sturdy branch, his gray eyes unmoving as he watched the skirmish below. At his signal, the loyal squad around him, Hinata, Sancha, and the others, paused in mid-swing. "I'll handle these stragglers," he said coolly. "Understood, Captain," the young shinobi chorused. With that, they leapt down, vanishing into the tangle of fog-cloaked fighters. Satisfied, Nathan turned his gaze toward the gap in the tree line where the four captains had fled. He singled out one figure, his fingers forming a precise hand seal. With barely a ripple in the air, he activated the body flicker technique and disappeared. Deep in the forest, a lone Kirigakure Chunin tore through the undergrowth, heart-pounding as he tried desperately to outrun his unseen pursuer. Nathan sprinted across the battlefield, casting a desperate glance over his shoulder, silently begging that the ghost sword wouldn't overtake him. After all, a name, like a tree's shadow, follows you everywhere. In just a few months, Nathan's reputation has spread so far and wide that nearly every shinobi here trembles at the mention of the ghost sword. Many Jonin have heard the rumors. They respect Nathan's power and admit he might overwhelm them in a straight fight, but they're not paralyzed by fear. The real panic grips the Chunin. They've watched friends and comrades fall to Nathan's blade again and again. To them, he is more than a formidable opponent. He is a murderer in the flesh. So when four Kirigakure captains spotted Nathan's figure barreling toward them, they didn't hesitate. They turned on their heels and ran, abandoning any thought of standing their ground without Jonin backup. Better to preserve their lives than to test the ghost sword's lethal edge. What they failed to grasp, however, was Nathan's relentless hunger for chakra. Underestimating that hunger would prove to be their gravest mistake. Nathan's gains in both physical strength and mental acuity had dramatically boosted his daily chakra reserves, but even the smallest quarry is still meat, and he never passed up an easy meal. He might let go of tougher targets like Jonin of Kawada Yuhiro's caliber, but he refused to ignore any fat prize that wandered within his reach. To him, the four Kirigakure Chunin who tried to escape were nothing more than a juicy snack. Without a second thought, he pursued them into the forest. One of the young Chunin, heart-pounding, spun around to confront his hunter, only to freeze in shock at the silhouette perched on a low branch overhead. "Uchiha Seimei?" he blurted. It wasn't Seimei at all, but Nathan. He stood perfectly still on the broad limb, every muscle relaxed, his dark eyes tracking the Chunin's panicked movements. Below him, the ninja's face drained of color. In a frenzy, he hurled a kunai upward and then, whether it hit its mark or not, abandoned all caution and fled down a different path. He sprinted until his lungs burned, then abruptly halted. The heavy pounding of his heart wouldn't let him ignore the nagging sense that something was terribly wrong. Just as the Kirigakure Chunin wondered what was wrong, an invisible vice gripped his throat, cutting off his air. His vision swam, and he barely registered that he was still standing until a figure dropped from the branches above. Nathan, who'd somehow materialized on a low bough, clamped a single hand around the ninja's neck. "Ho ho ho," he murmured, amusement curling his lips. A wave of suffocating terror washed over the Chunin as he tried to force a sound past Nathan's iron grip. He clawed at the attacker's palm, desperate to break free, but it was already too late. In the seconds before his senses began to betray him, Nathan had severed the flow of chakra from the man's body. Now, with cold precision, he began siphoning the ninja's vital energies, mind and muscle alike, leeching away the life force that kept him standing. The Chunin's struggles grew weaker, his arms dropping limply at his sides. Nathan stood firm, expression unreadable, as the last flickers of resistance faded. The moment the final trace of chakra, mental strength, and physical stamina slipped away, the Kirigakure shinobi went still. With a soft grunt, Nathan loosened his grip and let the lifeless body slump to the earth. Moonlight gleamed off the fallen Chunin's empty gaze, and the forest fell silent once more. Chapter 10. Fire Release, Su-Style Burning Technique. Nathan held up his hand, unleashing the blazing jutsu. Within moments, the fallen bodies and all traces of the skirmish were reduced to ash. Leaving nothing behind, he vanished from the clearing. Over the next several minutes, the 3 Kirigakure Chunin who had broken away from the main fight suffered the same fate. Nathan wasted no time in pursuing them. As each fled, he silently activated his Sharingan, trapping them in a powerful genjutsu. Once under his control, he combined a swift chakra absorption with his fire release, Su-Style Burning Technique. When the flames subsided, only ash remained where the shinobi had stood. With each absorption, Nathan's chakra reserve swelled, already nearly full. To maintain this advantage, he formed a shadow clone and dispatched it to scout for a suitable training site, ensuring his energy remained at peak capacity. Satisfied, he dispelled the clone and returned to the central battlefield. There, the tide of battle had turned. What had begun as a Kirigakure advantage now clearly favored Konoha. Nathan observed the shift with cool detachment. With 2 additional Chunin teams reinforcing Konoha's lines, their combined strength had decisively swung the scales. For Nathan, however, victory had long been assured. The escape of 4 Kirigakure leaders had struck the remaining shinobi like a thunderclap. With their commanders gone and overall strength severely diminished, morale collapsed. Everything now pointed toward a crushing defeat. By the time Nathan arrived, 2 genin lay dead on the field, and the Kirigakure forces were faltering under a relentless assault. Without hesitation, Nathan assessed the situation. He saw half-exhausted shinobi scrambling to defend themselves, armed only with hope and rudimentary tools. Stepping into the fray, he unleashed his full power. The difference in skill and speed was overwhelming. Within moments, the enemy's advance collapsed, stray kunai clattered to the ground, and panicked shouts gave way to stunned silence. Determined to avoid any further entanglements, Nathan ordered his team to gather only the usable ninja tools, shuriken, kunai, scrolls, and leave the bodies and debris behind. No time would be wasted on cleanup. With everything secured, he pulled back his men and vanished into the misty forest from which they had emerged. What Nathan didn't know was that, shortly after his departure, 2 more Kirigakure squads swept into the clearing. Expecting to catch a fleeing force, they instead found only abandoned weapons and broken armor. Disappointed and unable to trace any sign of Nathan's trail, the mist shinobi reluctantly turned back, their mission unfulfilled, and the true victor already gone. Chapter 602, Promotion Night had fallen over Yujin Port, and the Konoha camp lay quiet under a canopy of stars. Inside one of the larger tents, Nathan sat cross-legged on a simple mat. He was deep in meditation, cycling between 2 advanced techniques, the Palm Immortal Technique and the Reflection of the Heart Technique. One focused on forging his body into unbreakable steel, the other on refining his chakra flow to awaken the next stage of his Sharingan. Despite the grueling battles of the day, Nathan felt no fatigue. He'd completed his missions, returned safely to camp, and immediately dove back into training. Granted, some of his time had been spent delegating noisier jutsu to shadow clones, practical, but not suited to the silent precision these techniques demanded. Only his original body could truly benefit from this intimate level of practice. As the hours passed, the glow of his chakra gently pulsed in the dim tent. Nathan's vision flickered between the calm, reflective black of the palm immortal and the swirling crimson of his Sharingan. He had set an ambitious training schedule for himself, one that would stretch well past midnight if he hoped to finish it all in a single evening. Just as exhaustion began to whisper at the edges of his concentration, a subtle shift rippled through his chakra network. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A new level of mastery had been achieved. Nathan's eyes snapped open. The tense shadows fell away as his senses sharpened. He could feel the change coursing through him. Stronger tissue, more responsive chakra channels, deeper insight through the Sharingan. A small smile curved his lips. Tonight's effort had paid off. And this was only the beginning. Nathan lowered his hands, pausing both the palm immortal and heart reflection techniques. He took a moment to center himself, then summoned his proficiency panel. At the top of the list, his chakra refining technique had leveled up from 5 to 6. He remembered calculating, after his last physique upgrade, that it would take about 19 days to reach level 6, and sure enough, exactly 19 days had passed. Because the chakra refining technique is passive, it isn't slowed by intense combat or other interruptions, so the upgrade arrived precisely on schedule. With the promotion to level 6, all its effects had improved dramatically. Most notably, his chakra recovery rate jumped from 2,000 points per hour to 3,000, yet there was no added strain on his body. Nathan was briefly taken aback, but as he tuned into his chakra flow, the difference became unmistakable. Energy circulated more smoothly and replenished far more quickly. He smiled, fully appreciating the power of his newly enhanced ability. After leveling up his skill, Nathan found that his chakra recovered faster, not because he was drawing more deeply on his physical or mental reserves, but because he'd simply learned to use his energy more efficiently, wasting far less of it. As a result, there was no additional strain on his body, and he could continue running the chakra refining technique for 20 hours each day. Thanks to this boost in efficiency, his daily chakra yield jumped from 40,000 points to 60,000, a net gain of 20,000. At first, Nathan planned to funnel all of that extra chakra into his wind release, Rasen Shuriken, hoping to speed its progression. But after some thought, he decided to split the increase evenly between two other practices, the Guardian Seal and the Sealing Array. By doing so, he stood to gain roughly 100 additional proficiency points per day in each technique. He had 3 reasons for this decision. First, he'd already invested a great deal of chakra into the wind release, Rasen Shuriken, and there was no urgent need to pour even more into it right now. Secondly, Nathan's mastery of 4 ninjutsu, Wind Style Vacuum Jade, Wind Style Vacuum Blade, Wind Style Wind Devour, and Water Style Exploding Water Wave is nearly perfected. Once he upgrades them all, his daily chakra reserves will increase by 180,000 points, leaving him more than enough energy to invest later in Wind Style Rasen Shuriken. The third and most important consideration is that the war is drawing to a close. According to his plan, as soon as the fighting ends and he's dealt with Danzo, he'll turn his attention to capturing the tailed beasts, and for that, he'll need advanced sealing techniques. While his current Guardian Seal and Sealing Array offer little direct benefit in the capture process, they share the same fundamental principles as more powerful seals. By refining those 2 techniques now, Nathan will deepen his grasp of sealing logic. When he moves on to study new sealing methods, he'll learn them faster, master them more thoroughly, and save a tremendous amount of chakra in the process. Nathan focused on the task at hand, channeling every last thought into his strategy. He invested all 20,000 chakra points into the Guardian Seal and the Sealing Array, but even that wasn't enough. He reminded himself that once he perfected advanced techniques like Wind Style, Vacuum Jade, he could siphon off some of that power and bolster these defenses further. For now, however, his full attention returned to the chakra refining technique. Now that it had risen to level 6, the technique offered more than faster chakra recovery. It accelerated the unlocking of his body's latent potential. At level 5, an hour of meditating under the refining technique raised his chakra limit by 32 points. To test the new efficiency, Nathan closed his eyes, drew in a steady stream of breath, and let the refined currents flow through him. 15 minutes later, he opened his eyes and checked the chakra bar on his display. 16 points. A quarter of an hour for 16 points meant that, at this rate, he could increase his chakra ceiling by 64 every hour. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. With this kind of progress, he was well on his way to mastering the power he needed, and then some. Nathan reviewed the numbers again. His daily gain had just doubled from what he'd managed before. If he ran the chakra refinement technique for 20 hours straight, he'd earn 1,280 proficiency points, raising his chakra limit by over 1,000 points every single day. That pace might not be the absolute fastest in the shinobi world, but it certainly ranked among the elite. And this was only the beginning. Once he upgraded the refinement technique again, the growth rate would climb even higher. At that point, his real concern wouldn't be squeezing out more potential in a short time, but whether his body could handle it. There was, however, a significant hurdle. Advancing from level 6 to level 7 required a full 10,000 proficiency points. At 20 points per day, it would take him 500 days, well over a year. Even if his physique attribute improved and allowed him to sustain the technique 24 hours a day, that only raised his daily gain to 24 points. He'd still need more than 400 days to reach 10,000 points. This was no quick path to power. It wasn't a brief session, but with the war finally over, Nathan wasn't under any time pressure. Once he'd confirmed the upgraded chakra refinement technique was working as intended, he abandoned further tinkering and returned to his cultivation routine. Minutes turned into hours as the night deepened around him. At last, after what felt like an eternity, Nathan completed his exercises. Still fully dressed, he slipped into his sleeping bag and drifted off to rest. Chapter 603, Powder Keg. 3 days had passed in what felt like a single breath. Now, late in the afternoon, a grim tableau lay just outside Yujin Port, deep within the forest. Nathan withdrew his palm from the chest of a fallen Kirigakure Chunin, letting the body crumple to the leaf-littered ground. At that moment, a Konoha Chunin stumbled up to him, one arm dangling uselessly at his side. It was Hinata Yamacha, his longtime comrade. Hinata cast a brief, steady glance at the slain mist ninja before meeting Nathan's eyes. "Captain," she reported, her voice calm despite the carnage around them, "we've eliminated every enemy." Nathan swept his gaze across the aftermath. Broken chakra weapons and spent shuriken were scattered like fallen leaves. Pools of blood darkened the earth beneath twisted roots, and bodies, both Konoha and Kirigakure shinobi, lay motionless side by side. The mist ninja losses far outnumbered their own. It was clear a savage battle had just ripped through this grove. The latest flare-up in the escalating conflict between Konoha and Kirigakure that had ignited 3 days ago. Outside Atsuzu Port, shinobi from both sides clashed in brutal, unrelenting skirmishes. Blood stained the earth beneath their feet, and every engagement, once just small squad-level clashes, had escalated into full-blown confrontations. Once a fight broke out, it rarely stopped. Each side was forced to pour in fresh troops to reinforce the front lines. Just moments ago, Nathan's patrol team had intercepted a distress signal and raced toward the epicenter of the fighting. They hadn't gone far before they collided head-on with a Kirigakure support squad. There was no time to exchange words. Enemies met, blades flashed, and combat erupted instantly. Fortunately, Nathan proved more than a match. In a swift, decisive exchange, he overwhelmed the opposing team's special jonin leader, routing the squad before additional reinforcements could arrive. Had he hesitated, the battle would have snowballed beyond containment. Now the entire area around Atsuzu Port resembles a powder keg, primed to ignite into what could very well be the final, decisive engagement between these rival forces. Nathan watched the dying embers of the battlefield and sighed. He longed for a swift end to the war, but he refused to be the spark that rekindled it. Raising his chin, he turned to Hinata Yamacha. "Organize a team to recover every abandoned weapon and tool," he ordered. "Once that's done, prepare to move up and support us at the front." "Understood, Captain." Hinata saluted crisply before disappearing into the cratered earth to marshal the retrieval parties. In these remote fields, mid-battle resupply was impossible, so salvaging lost gear was their only guarantee of safety. Minute by minute, The soldiers combed the scarred landscape. Broken kunai, shattered shuriken, spent scrolls, all were gathered and catalogued. Bodies were marked and set aside respectfully. When the last makeshift marker had been planted, Nathan gave the word and led his squad toward the next battlefield. They advanced in wary silence, every step alert to ambush. Then, abruptly, Nathan came to a stop. A surge of memories, countless drills at dawn, the crackle of campfires, the face of one comrade he'd lost, washed over him. For a moment, past and present intertwined, and Nathan stood rooted in that fleeting, powerful tide of recollection. "Is it time yet?" Nathan whispered to himself, even as he carved out a corner of his mind to absorb and integrate the past hour's worth of shadow clone training. The battlefield around him was growing more desperate by the minute, but he refused to pause his practice. Every second of relentless repetition had paid off. 15 minutes later, as he crystallized those clones' memories into his own skill set, 4 of his signature jutsu surged forward to level 7, the pinnacle of B-rank ninjutsu: Wind Release, Vacuum Jade; Wind Release, Vacuum Blade; Wind Release, Wind Devour; Water Release, Explosive Water Rush. Nathan felt his strength swell with the upgrades. He longed to test each technique's newfound power, but the timing wasn't right. Instead, he stowed the impulse and focused on the extra chakra he'd unlocked by perfecting his art. Nathan realized he couldn't pour all 180,000 chakra points into Wind Release, Spiral Shuriken at once. He paused to reconsider and set aside 60,000 points, splitting them evenly between Guardian Seal and the Sealing Object Array. Instantly, their daily proficiency gains jumped from 150 to 450 and from 140 to 440 respectively, more than enough to keep both skills advancing steadily. Next, he assigned 30,000 points to Water Release, Shark Bullet Technique. That raised its daily chakra allocation from 57,000 to 87,000, and its proficiency gain from 380 to 580, a change that would significantly hasten his push toward the perfect level of Love 9, 0-0. With 90,000 points still unspent, Nathan divided them into 3 equal shares: 30,000 each for Wind Release, Spiral Shuriken, Multiple Shadow Clone Technique, and Shuriken Shadow Clone Technique, ensuring all 3 jutsu would continue to develop in parallel. In this way, their skills would improve more quickly, and daily drills would never feel tedious. "Captain, we're almost there!" Nathan jolted out of his daydream at Hyuga Yamacha's urgent call. He shook his head, brushing aside thoughts of strategy and progress, and focused on the dense treetops ahead. Even without activating his Byakugan, his heightened hearing picked up the faint clash of blades and shouted commands somewhere beyond the foliage. Silently, Nathan raised his right arm in the signal to halt. Instantly, his team froze in place. Branch by branch, they melted into the canopy, each shinobi finding a secure perch and scanning the forest around them. Nathan turned to Yamacha. "Status report. How's the fight looking?" Yamacha's eyes glowed white as he activated his Byakugan, the 8 Tomoe blossoming in his vision. He swept his gaze over the battlefield hidden below, enemy shinobi skirmishing near a ruined pavilion, allies pinned against the crumbling walls. After a moment, he closed his eyes and relayed what he'd seen. Nathan listened quietly, weighing the odds. He tapped his lip thoughtfully, then nodded once. Confident that they could tip the balance, he gave the go-ahead. "All right, let's move." With a silent count, the team descended through the branches, shadows among shadows, ready to turn the tide of battle in their allies' favor. However, this time they slowed their pace as they entered the next stretch of road. Everyone's eyes stayed trained on the ground and the surrounding thicket, lessons learned over the past few days, because mist ninjas often plant traps near battle sites. Their caution proved well-founded. One by one, they spotted and evaded a series of detonating talismans until at last they came upon the main battlefield. Without wasting a moment on further planning, they surged into the fight. Hyuga Yamcha, alongside several Chunin and Genin, zeroed in on the enemy's junior ranks, aiming to relieve the pressure on their own lower-tier shinobi. Meanwhile, Nathan charged straight at the 2 opposing Jonin. His bold assault drew those elite fighters away from the embattled Konoha Jonin, finally granting them a much-needed respite. Clang! 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 The sharp ring of steel on steel cut through the air as Nathan fought two mist-hidden ninja at once and held his own without a hint of strain. He cast a quick glance around the field. Everyone else had paired off, and the front lines had settled into a tense equilibrium. Confident that no one would come to his aid or ambush him from the flank, he refocused on his two adversaries. Up to now, Nathan had deliberately held back. Though he wielded more than enough power to finish them off, he'd been content to deflect their blows and study their techniques. Part of this restraint came from respect for the Mist Village's special jonin. These two were far stronger than ordinary chunin or genin, even if they didn't quite match the prowess of a full-fledged jonin. Special jonin, warriors who, like these two, devoted themselves to mastering a single deadly skill, made up the bulk of shinobi commanders on today's battlefields. Truly elite jonin, the likes of Horikawa Hirosuke and Kawada Yuhiro that Nathan had encountered before, were a rarer breed. But now, having assessed their moves and found a pattern, he decided it was time to end this. With a sudden surge of chakra, Nathan launched himself forward, his blade flashing like a streak of lightning, to deliver the decisive strike. In any large shinobi village, true jonin are the bedrock, the elite warriors who shoulder the village's heaviest responsibilities. Because of that, jonin ranks are never handed out lightly. There are always fewer jonin than the village might technically need. Yet exceptional shinobi can earn a special jonin title even if they aren't equally skilled in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. If one aptitude is staggering enough, it more than makes up for weaknesses elsewhere. Take Might Guy, for example. His ninjutsu and genjutsu are practically non-existent, but his taijutsu is off the charts. Konoha recognizes him as an elite jonin despite those glaring gaps. Rank, then, is meaningless if it doesn't reflect true power. With that in mind, Nathan cast aside his racing thoughts. The immediate crisis was under control, and now he had two test subjects ready. It was time to put his freshly perfected techniques to the ultimate trial. He hadn't had an opening until now, but the moment presented itself, and Nathan wasn't about to let it slip away. After deflecting the Kirigakure Jonin's strike, he pivoted on one foot and suddenly dropped back, creating distance between himself and his opponent. At the same time, a second mist ninja came flanking him from the side, but Nathan was already in motion. He sidestepped the blade, then bounded away in two swift leaps, putting several meters between him and both attackers. Unfazed by their wary glares, Nathan's hands flew into a quick series of seals. With a brisk swipe of his palm along the sword's edge, he infused the blade with nearly transparent chakra. Instantly, the long sword pulsed with a razor-sharp aura, the air before it rippling as if already sheared. It resembled the wind chakra infusion he had practiced before, but the similarity ended there. Previously, he had only leveraged the wind's natural cutting quality to sharpen his strike. Now, he was unleashing a full-fledged ninjutsu, wind-style, vacuum blade. As a B-rank wind technique focused on offense, its power far outstripped any mere elemental augmentation. A faint green aura pulsed around Nathan as he unleashed his flash sword technique, cleaving one mist ninja in two. The two survivors exchanged a quick glance, then silently split to flank him, closing in from both sides. At the exact moment they met, Nathan twisted his body just in time to evade a kunai thrust from the left. With fluid precision, he spun his long sword and slashed at the attacker on his right. Ding! A sharp ring of metal on metal split the air. The ninja's kunai met Nathan's blade head-on, deflecting the blow. But almost instantly, a crackling hiss followed. Sparks flew where sword and kunai collided, and fine fractures spread across the throwing knife's DG, as if it might shatter with the next impact. Nathan's longsword was surrounded by a barely visible whirlwind of cutting wind blades, each razor-thin gust slicing at the kunai. Every spinning fragment of air added pressure to the metal, widening the cracks. Crack! Crack! The brittle sound echoed again, and the ninja's arm trembled as his weapon threatened to break apart in his hand. Nathan held his stance, ready for the next move. Nathan's blade met the kunai in a single, lightning-fast strike, and the mist ninja's weapon exploded into jagged fragments. The attacker froze, eyes wide in shock. He hadn't expected his steel to splinter so easily. Only a moment later, though, training kicked in. He dove backward, springing off the ground to evade Nathan's follow-up, and slapped a fresh kunai into his palm with metallic clangs. Nathan closed the gap again, engaging him in a flurry of strikes. This time, the ninja's kunai held, though each clash still rattled them both. From the edge of his vision, Nathan spotted another mist operative weaving hand signs, chakra crackling at his fingertips, ready to unleash a jutsu. Recognizing the danger, Nathan broke off the duel. He backed away, putting as much space between them as he could, all while gauging what he'd just seen. That first strike, his wind-style vacuum blade, had been devastating, cleaving through steel like tissue, but its power faded almost immediately. He'd need to keep his distance if he wanted to survive the next phase of this ambush. Nathan knew that a ninjutsu's first strike was always its most devastating. Any follow-up attacks lost power quickly. Such techniques were perfect for a sneak ambush, but in a prolonged exchange, they were practically useless. He narrowed his Sharingan eyes on the jagged kunai held by the mist shinobi at his side and grinned. "Water style, whirlpool water wheel," he called out. At that moment, the mist shinobi finished her hand seals and sprang forward, twin whirling wheels of water spinning in each hand. It was clearly a close-quarters jutsu. Nathan reacted instantly, vaulting backward to evade the kunai thrown by her partner, and simultaneously widening the distance between himself and this charging foe. He sheathed his long sword in a single fluid motion, then snapped his fingers together into a seal. Before the water blades could close in, he raised his voice, ready to unleash his own counterattack. Nathan tensed, then thrust out his hand. Whoosh! A spinning disk of razor-sharp wind erupted from his palm, hurtling straight toward the Mist Village shinobi's face. This was no ordinary trick. It was a B-rank technique. Wind release, vacuum sphere. The Mist shinobi's eyes went wide. He twisted aside at the last moment, and the air blade smashed into a nearby tree, gouging a fist-sized hole in the trunk. Nathan's lips curled into a cold smile. That was only the beginning. He shifted his stance and formed two quick hand seals. Suddenly, a volley of smaller wind blades shot forth, each one streaking through the undergrowth like silver knives. They fanned out to seal every escape route, each disc aimed at the enemy's vital points. Cornered, the shinobi crouched and thrust both palms into the misty ground. With an explosive swirl, a roaring water wheel coalesced around him, its torrents clashing against Nathan's wind blades. The miniature tornadoes shattered against the wall of water, spraying mist in all directions and buying him a precious moment. Just then, another Mist Village shinobi emerged from the fog. He dashed in front of Nathan's next attack, intercepting the wind discs with a red-rimmed steel blade. The intervention forced Nathan to halt his jutsu, and the newcomer's arrival turned the tide, relieving the first shinobi's precarious position. Chapter 605, Killing in Melee. The Mist Jonin barreled toward him with unrestrained ferocity. Nathan stood his ground and, at just the right moment, unleashed a flurry of shurikens. The Jonin twisted aside, narrowly evading the blades, but surged forward all the same. Nathan's eyes narrowed. In an instant, he sent out a second volley, each shuriken swimming through the air with uncanny speed. They overtook the first batch with metallic tings, then veered on a dime to slash at the Jonin's side. Such precision, changing a projectile's trajectory mid-flight, was a technique one might expect only from an Uchiha wielding the Sharingan. Caught off guard, the Mist Shinobi's expression flickered with alarm. He skidded to a halt and leapt backward, swallowing hard as a cluster of shurikens whistled past him by mere inches. A bead of sweat traced down his temple as he stared at Nathan with growing trepidation. But Nathan gave him no quarter. His gaze remained cold and unwavering. Raising his right hand in a swift seal formation, he drew on the surrounding wind chakra. "Wind style, vacuum jade," Nathan intoned. An invisible gale erupted from his palm, coalescing into a razor-sharp vortex aimed squarely at the stunned Jonin. The battlefield fell deathly silent for the fraction of a second before the deadly gale swept forward, and the fight truly began. Nathan didn't aim at the flanking Mist Ninja this time. His sights were locked on the one directly before him. The ninja sensed the shifting threat and darted sideways, blade in hand, slashing out to deflect the oncoming chakra-infused air bullets. Nathan's Sharingan flared to life, reading every twitch of muscle and flicker of intent. Then, in an instant, Nathan halted his jutsu. He drew the long sword from his hip as emerald chakra coalesced around his blade. That was the instant sword technique. Like a striking serpent, he lunged forward at blistering speed, faster than the ninja could recalibrate from his last dodge. A silver arc split the air. Without pause, Nathan wove together the illusion sword and shadow sword techniques. 6 phantom blades, 3 real, 3 mere afterimages, rained down in perfect harmony. The Mist Ninja's eyes widened in shock as the 6 slashes bore in on him, each one a proof of Nathan's lethal precision. Nathan was a close combat specialist, not an illusion expert, so he hadn't seen the trick behind the sword shadows at first. With no time to parry, he could only dodge, and even that was pushing it. After all, how could anyone outmaneuver an attack launched with the Sharingan? Swish. The tearing of fabric, a strangled groan. Nathan's blade had cut through the mist-hidden shinobi's cloak, carving a grievous wound into his chest, bone visible beneath torn flesh. A second slash, born of a separated shadow sword, gashed his left shoulder. Blood spouted, quickly turning his uniform a dark, glossy red. Despite the agony, Shinji Tamura gritted his teeth, snapped a kunai from his belt, and flung it at Nathan, then stumbled backward. Nathan's Sharingan whirled, every detail of the spinning kunai laid bare before him. He thrust out his left hand and snatched it from midair. With a swift flick of the wrist, he sent it hurtling back. Puff! The kunai struck true, embedding itself deep in Shinji's side. He reeled as pain flared, and the battlefield fell eerily quiet, broken only by the drip of blood pooling around him. Shinji Tamura gasped, clutching his chest, and crumpled to the ground. Nathan watched in horror as the kunai he'd just thrown protruded from Shinji's heart. Shinji managed to choke out one word, "You," before his eyes went blank and he fell utterly still. Across from them, a ninja from the Mist Village, who had only moments before been celebrating his narrow escape, stared in stunned silence at his fallen comrade. Confusion flickered across his face as he struggled to grasp what had just happened. Nathan, however, stayed razor-sharp. The instant he spotted the enemy hesitate, he unleashed his instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between them. The Mist Ninja, finally snapping out of his shock, flung up his kunai to block the blow. But he was outmatched. His reflexes were too slow, his defense too weak. Nathan's blade bit deep, carving a wound across the ninja's torso before he even realized what was happening. The Mist Warrior staggered back, blood seeping between his fingers as he stared up at Nathan in alarm and regret. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the rasp of the fallen ninja's breath and the stillness of Shinji Tamura's lifeless form. Nathan stood over them both, blade lowered, as the weight of what he'd done settled like lead in his chest. Humph! A low groan slipped from the Mist Shinobi's lips. Seizing the opening, he backed off, cast a swift glance around, and bolted toward the neighboring skirmishes. There, 2 Konoha ninjas were each locked in combat with a pair of Kirigakure fighters. He clearly intended to sow confusion and lean on his teammates' strength to carve out a chance at survival. Nathan let him go. That rogue had become more of a liability than an asset, siphoning energy from the remaining senior ninjas. Now, 6 shinobi were caught in a chaotic free-for-all. No longer tied to a single opponent, Nathan found himself hard to pin down, and his adversaries couldn't coordinate their efforts against him. The clash dragged on, but he remained unthreatened, content to wait for just the right opportunity. His scarlet-blooded Sharingan spun relentlessly, each rotation revealing another detail. As Nathan deftly parried the surrounding Kirigakure strikes, he cataloged every movement. Thanks to the Sharingan's heightened insight, he soon discerned the telltale battle habits of several veteran Mist Shinobi, information that would give him the decisive edge he needed. Nathan's almost instinctive movements had always been the key to creating openings in battle. When 2 assailants pressed in on him from opposite sides, he was forced to fall back. Seizing the moment, a Mist Ninja streaked forward without hesitation, thrusting a kunai straight for Nathan's throat. It was clear from the ninja's unrelenting aggression that this attack wasn't merely a bid to support his teammates, it was ingrained habit. Time and again, whenever an enemy gave ground, this warrior would pounce. Nathan recognized the pattern and planned to turn it against him. As the Mist Ninja lunged, Nathan reacted on instinct. He snapped his longsword upward, catching the kunai on the flat of the blade just before it could find its mark. Steel rang against steel, sparks flew, and the kunai spun off harmlessly into the gloom. Heart pounding, Nathan planted his feet, sword at the ready, and met his opponent's fierce gaze. Kitano Ichiro caught the faint shift in Nathan's expression and couldn't help but curl his lips into a confident grin. With a deft flick of his wrist, he spun the kunai between his fingers, ready to press the attack. One swift follow-up could overwhelm Nathan before he even realized what was happening. Once Nathan was on the back foot, Kitano's teammates could swoop in. If they couldn't finish him off, they'd at least leave him badly wounded. But Kitano's anticipation proved premature. As he lunged in for his second strike, Nathan's left hand shot forward. Without a sound, a pale blue sphere of chakra blossomed in his palm. In the very next instant, Nathan slammed it into the Mist Ninja's midsection with brutal force. This was no ordinary jutsu. It was the unmarked A-rank technique known as Rasengan. Chapter 606, Acceleration Whoosh! A gout of blood exploded from the Mist Jonin's mouth as Kitano Ichiro crashed against a massive tree. The impact rattled his spine, and he spat up another mouthful of blood before crumpling to the forest floor, utterly spent. Even a seasoned Jonin couldn't withstand an unguided Rasengan without proper defense. "Kitano! Captain Kitano!" Two voices rang out in alarm. Another Mist Jonin and the special operative who had been pursuing Nathan. Panic laced their shouts, and every nearby Kirigakure shinobi froze at the sight. Their comrade lay incapacitated, and fear flickered in their eyes. By contrast, the Konoha forces fought on with renewed vigor. The two Jonin in their midst and the Chunin who had held the line began to exchange gleeful glances. Until now, they'd been pressed hard by the Mist Ninja, outnumbered and on the defensive, even with Nathan's arrival. But with Kitano down, their morale surged. The battle had just taken a decisive turn. Nathan had already cut down two Jonin in rapid succession, rendering their earlier disadvantages meaningless. He swept his gaze across the battlefield, gauging the expressions of his comrades. Kitano Ichiro lay severely wounded and unconscious. Nathan spared him only a passing glance before sprinting toward the Kirigakure special Jonin he'd been pursuing. His goal was clear: shatter the Mist Ninja's morale completely and end the fight before more enemies could arrive. Though his team had flipped the tables and could, in theory, wipe out every remaining Mist Ninja, Nathan knew the advantage was tenuous. Given their location, reinforcements from Kirigakure would inevitably join the fray if the skirmish dragged on. At that point, a full-scale battle was unavoidable. He felt no fear for his own life, but if he could choose, he'd avoid such drawn-out warfare. He much preferred quiet training to clashing once more with the Mist. Not long ago, Nathan had perfected Wind Release, Vacuum Jade, along with 3 other ninjutsu. Next on his agenda was the Rasengan, and judging by his progress, he'd master it today, or tomorrow at the latest. Once that A-rank offensive technique was under his belt, it would not only boost his raw power, but also accelerate his training of Wind Release, Spiral Shuriken. With such clear goals, he had no desire to waste time tangling with ordinary Mist Shinobi. If he hadn't been sucked into that inescapable whirlpool, he never would have set foot on this final battlefield. Drawing a steady breath, Nathan closed the distance to his opponent. In a single fluid motion, he swung his long blade, its edge gleaming like liquid moonlight. At the same moment, he activated both the illusion sword technique and the shadow sword technique. 3 real swords and 3 illusory echoes, 6 phantom blades in all, raced toward the Mist Ninja from every conceivable angle. Unlike Tamura Shinji, the Kirigakure special Jonin facing Nathan possessed a far keener perception. The instant Nathan unleashed his phantom sword technique, 3 shimmering sword shadows sprang into existence, and the Jonin's eyes immediately picked out the phantoms. Yet even after dismissing those 3 as illusions, he still couldn't defend against the 3 genuine blades closing in on him. With nowhere left to stand, the Jonin fell back. When Nathan had seriously wounded Kitano Ichiro, Kitano had been farther away, just enough distance to react. Had he been any closer, given the Jonin's superior hand-to-hand skills, his fate would surely have mirrored Shinji's. Now, as the last of Nathan's illusory swords dissolved, Nathan closed the gap without hesitation and struck again. The interval was too brief for the Jonin to summon either his illusion sword technique or his shadow blade technique. All he could manage was a desperate reinforced block. Ding, dang, dang. The crisp clang of steel rang out in rapid succession. Not long ago, Nathan had been ensnared by one of the Kirigakure Shinobi, and in just a few strikes, he'd already taken another wound. Now, sensing his momentary eye weakness, several Mist Village Chunin closed in, determined to overwhelm him. A dozen shuriken whirled through the air, targeting every exposed inch of his body. Nathan's Sharingan flared, mapping each blade's flight path in perfect clarity. With a single fluid motion, he swept his long sword across the incoming weapons, the metal ringing sharply as he deflected them all. No pause, no hesitation. He pivoted on his heel and surged forward, set on cutting down the special Jonin who'd instigated the attack. But before he could reach his mark, a wave of chakra rippled through the underbrush. Nathan spun and caught sight of another Kirigakure Chunin stepping out from behind a tree, already sealing a jutsu. The shinobi's lips moved in a silent chant, ready to unleash his technique. Nathan's expression didn't waver. Calmly, he raised his left hand and wove a rapid sequence of seals. Fire release, great fireball technique, he intoned. In an instant, a massive sphere of flame roared from his mouth, surging through the clearing. It struck the ambusher's position with a thunderous blast, splintering the tree behind him and sending him tumbling back in a cascade of embers and smoke. The way lay clear, and Nathan pressed on, sword gleaming in the fiery aftermath. Phew! Nathan expelled a torrent of flames that instantly coalesced into a spinning fireball, hurtling toward the Kirigakure Chunin. At that same moment, his opponent unleashed a towering column of water. Where fire met water, a sharp sizzle rang out as steam billowed up in a thick, white fog. Nathan squinted through the haze and realized it wasn't just vapor, it was a deliberate smokescreen. Someone had combined a water release technique with the famed Kirigakure method to conceal their position. He leapt back just in time. Swish, swish, kunai shot from his sleeve and embedded themselves in the ground. In an instant, the explosive tags wound around the blades ignited. One by one they detonated, hurling fireballs into the fog and shattering the cloud of mist. Each blast sent powerful shockwaves radiating outward. Behind the dispersing steam, a voice echoed softly, "Is he dead?" Before anyone could react, a sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, instantly scattering the pale mist. The surrounding trees shuddered as leaves cascaded down in a green torrent. "Watch out!" someone cried. In that same heartbeat, the sickening slice of steel through flesh rang out. Nathan materialized at the side of a Kirigakure Chunin, his long blade slashing across the man's throat and severing his carotid artery in one brutal sweep. A geyser of blood spurted skyward, hot and furious. Nathan's form shimmered with a ghostly green light, and then he was gone. Moments later, he reappeared behind another Kirigakure shinobi, who spun instantly to block the attack. Their weapons clashed in a shower of sparks, but Nathan's momentum was unstoppable. In the brief stalemate, his left hand crackled with swirling chakra, a Rasengan charged to the brink of levels 8 and 9. With a feral shout, he rammed the spinning sphere into the man's chest. The crack of shattering ribs echoed like a drumbeat as the Chunin collapsed, the impact driving him to the ground. The Kirigakure Chunin facing Nathan let out a spray of blood and was hurled backward. Chapter 6-7, Deterrence. Nathan didn't pause after killing two opponents in quick succession. A faint green glow rippled over his body as he activated the instant sword technique, vanishing and reappearing before a third Kirigakure Chunin in the blink of an eye. The clash of Nathan's long sword against the Chunin's kunai sent sparks flying. Spotting Nathan's raised left hand and recalling how his comrade had fallen moments ago, the Chunin kicked off the ground with both feet, leveraging the recoil from his kunai to spring backward. But the raised hand was nothing more than a feint. The instant their eyes locked, Nathan unleashed the Genjutsu Sharingan, yanking the Chunin's consciousness into a powerful illusion. In that split second, Nathan's left hand transformed into a razor-sharp blade. He drew it across the Chunin's throat, and a jet of blood erupted, though the flesh had never truly been cut. In reality, the deep, precise wound was carved by Nathan's chakra scalpel, invisible, yet devastatingly effective. With such potent techniques at his command, Nathan could dispose of ordinary chunin with effortless precision. Nathan paid no mind to the Kirigakure chunin, who had ripped himself free of the illusion, gasping for air. A green light flared around Nathan's form, and he reappeared before the nearest opponent. But before he could strike, a volley of shuriken tore through the space he'd just occupied. With a flick of his eyes, Nathan recognized the ambush. The remaining Kirigakure chunin had caught on to his pattern, 3 consecutive teleport strikes always targeting the closest foe. They'd positioned themselves to intercept him the moment he dematerialized. Unfazed, Nathan abandoned the hapless chunin at his feet. In a single, fluid motion, he vanished again. The whistling projectiles harmlessly passing through empty air. At the same instant, he locked onto the precise locations of his attackers and sent his own shuriken spinning toward them. The swift reversal, defense transforming into offense, threw the Kirigakure chunin into confusion. Their carefully laid trap had backfired, leaving them scrambling to regroup under Nathan's relentless assault. Taking advantage of the moment, Nathan locked on to one of the Kirigakure chunin and formed hand seals in an instant, Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The single shuriken he'd launched seemed to split into dozens of shadowy duplicates, all hurtling straight for their target. The chunin's eyes widened in alarm, but his reflexes held firm. With barely a heartbeat to spare, he used Henge no Jutsu to swap places with a nearby wooden stake. Thud, 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 the phantom shuriken embedded themselves in the wood where he once stood. Not far off, crouched behind a massive tree trunk, the chunin rematerialized, his face ashen with fear yet alight with relief. He'd survived. Before he could savor the moment, a comrade from the Mist Village barked a warning. "Watch out!" The shout cut through the forest's stillness. The chunin spun toward Nathan's last known position and found nothing but air. A cold bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he cast a nervous glance over his shoulder, fully aware that danger still lurked unseen. Although he saw no figure, the shadow on the ground told Nathan someone was crouched behind him. In that instant, his mind raced. He calculated the attacker's position from the angle of the shadow and lashed out, driving a kunai toward the unseen enemy's neck. Yet though his brain gave the command, his body refused to move. At the exact moment he committed to the strike, his vision snapped upward and swiveled around, revealing a headless corpse on the ground and a lone figure standing behind it. "Is that me?" Nathan whispered to himself, the dreadful realization dawning. The sight of the severed body sparked an epiphany in Kikutaji's heart. But before he could react, he met Nathan's unwavering gaze. In that heartbeat, Nathan's eyes flared crimson, Sharingan ignited, and all of Kikuta's remaining consciousness shattered. Expressionless, Nathan took 2 silent steps back, narrowly avoiding the arc of blood spurting from the corpse's neck. In barely more than a single breath, he had dispatched 3 opponents in swift succession. Nathan's would-be attackers froze in stunned silence. Though they'd planned to swarm him, none dared move forward now. He stood still for a heartbeat, then flicked his blade, sending droplets of blood arcing to the ground. His gaze locked onto the Kirigakure special jonin, the shinobi who had just unleashed the water-style Kirigakure technique. The jonin had struck at the perfect moment, but Nathan had effortlessly shattered the water jutsu with his wind-style, great breakthrough, and now the man's chakra aura lay all but spent. Rank alone kept the special jonin from fleeing. He still outranked the nearby mid- and low-level Kirigakure ninja, so Nathan spared him only a brief pause before charging again. None of the lesser shinobi dared step forward to block the attack, and even the distant Kirigakure jonin were pinned down by 2 Konoha operatives, unable to intervene. Faced with no other choice, the special jonin steeled himself, braced for Nathan's next strike. Escape was simply not an option. Nathan's speed outmatched his opponents by a wide margin. He never once dared turn his back. Clang! Clang! The clash of steel rang out as Nathan unleashed a relentless barrage of sword techniques, driving the Kirigakure special jonin onto the defensive. Only now did the surrounding Kirigakure chunin shake off their fear and launch their own jutsu to try and contain him. It was a futile effort. Their long-range attacks barely slowed Nathan's advance, and in moments he'd drawn blood again, this time slashing across the special jonin's ribs. It was the 3rd cut Nathan had scored. Shallow, perhaps, but enough blood loss was already wearing the enemy down. Seizing the opening, Nathan deftly evaded a flurry of surprise strikes from the Chunin at his flanks. Planting his feet, he gathered chakra, thrust his palms forward, and roared, "Fire style! Great fireball technique!" A colossal orb of flame erupted into the air, hurtling toward the enemy ranks. Nathan was only a few meters from the Kirigakure special Jonin, and he barely had time to react. In that split second, his heightened perception became his greatest asset. As soon as Nathan unleashed the fireball, the Jonin twisted aside. Boom! The blazing sphere slammed into a massive tree behind the Jonin, carving out a charred crater rimmed with flickering embers. Nathan's eyes flicked back to his opponent. Without hesitation, he reformed his hand seals and unleashed a second jutsu, fire style, Phoenix Fire technique. Puff! 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 Jets of searing flame streamed from his mouth like fiery bullets. This time the Jonin wasn't so lucky. Though he managed to shield his vital organs from the worst of it, the scorching blasts still ripped into his flesh, leaving burns and gashes across his torso. Chapter 608, Killing Chickens and Dogs. Kunai whistled through the air. Nathan's ears twitched. He didn't need to look to know their trajectory. With a subtle lean, he let them whiz past. Then, driving off the ground with both feet, he rocketed forward like a cannonball, closing the distance to the wounded, retreating Kirigakure special Jonin in an instant. The Jonin whirled around and launched a volley of slender steel needles. "Senbon!" he barked. Nathan's Sharingan flared. He tracked each tiny dart in mid-flight, drew his long sword with a sharp clang, and met them head-on. Clang! Ding! Ding! Metal rang against metal as Nathan's blade intercepted every needle with pinpoint precision. A verdant glow pulsed across his body as he activated the instant sword technique. In a blink, his speed doubled, then tripled, and he was suddenly standing before the startled Jonin. Swoosh! His sword arced in a lethal strike. Nathan's blade gleamed in the dim light as he squared off against the Kirigakure specialist before him. Channeling the illusion sword technique and the shadow sword technique in unison, he summoned 6 sword silhouettes, 3 illusory and 3 real, each slicing toward his opponent from a different direction. Nagashima Shuping's heart pounded with alarm. He could pinpoint the 3 phantoms instantly, but there was no time to evade the genuine strikes. Gritting his teeth, he stumbled backward and threw up a series of hand seals, activating the substitute technique. Swish! A wet, guttural sound tore through the air as Nathan's 3 real blades met their mark. The replacement took the hits, erupting into a fountain of blood-stained water that pooled on the ground. The crimson ripples spread outward, proof that although Shuping's clone had saved his body, it hadn't spared him from real harm. Nathan slid his longsword back into its sheath and glanced upward at a broad branch not far above. There, perched awkwardly, was Changdao Shuping, his hand pressed against a bleeding wound at his chest. Scarlet droplets seeped between his fingers, testament to the blow he'd just taken. But Nathan felt no mercy for his enemy. With a swift motion, Nathan traced the familiar hand seals of his ninjutsu. Fire style, great fireball technique. A roaring crimson sphere blasted from his palm, slamming into the branch. Wood shattered under the impact, and the wood caught flame in an instant. For a heartbeat, Nathan allowed himself a flicker of satisfaction, until Shuping sprang away to a neighboring trunk. His face was ashen, breath ragged, cold sweat trickling down his temples. He looked more battered than before, but Nathan's resolve didn't waver. Before Shuping could gather himself, Nathan wove his seals once more and prepared to unleash a second fireball technique. Yet this time, Shuping was ready. He'd already begun forming his own seals, bracing for the next fiery strike. Before the blazing fireball could strike, Nathan wove the seals for water style, water array wall. In an instant, a translucent wall of water shot up before him, swallowing the fireball's impact. He barely paused, sidestepping a volley of thrown kunai and strayed jutsu from hidden mist shinobi at the edge of the clearing, before shifting his hand seals and unleashing fire style, great dragon fire technique. 3 massive dragons of crimson flame roared from his palms, spiraling left, center, and right toward Nagashima Shuping, who crouched high among the branches of a nearby tree. Recognizing that even his best water techniques couldn't hold back 3 simultaneous attacks, Shuping leapt free and landed on an adjacent trunk just before the dragons descended. Boom! The fiery beast slammed into the tree, ripping bark apart and igniting it in an instant. The blaze roared outward, the heat stinging the cheeks of onlookers and sending sparks drifting through the night air. Through the crackling flames, Nagashima Shuping shielded his eyes and locked gazes with Nathan, curious to see what his opponent would do next. In that instant, a translucent blade of wind lanced through the flames and struck before him. Nathan's attack had been swifter than Shuping anticipated. Already weakened and suspended in midair, Shuping had no leverage to counter. His face drained of color as he twisted his torso, desperately trying to evade the onrushing wind blade, but Nathan's Sharingan left no room for escape. He had anticipated every move and chosen an angle Shuping couldn't avoid. A sickening tear of flesh echoed through the clearing as the wind blade sliced clean through Shuping's arm, severing it halfway. He barely had time to reel before Nathan unleashed a fine, high-pressure jet of water from his mouth, a razor-thin column that swept across the jungle and slammed into Shuping. White-hot agony coursed through his body. Blood spattered the undergrowth. Shuping's eyes flew wide with shock and pain as darkness threatened at the edges of his vision. He looked down and saw his body split open from waist to abdomen, vivid, multicolored intestines and organs spilling onto the ground, tugging him earthward. Beside him lay a familiar thigh. "That's my leg," he whispered, voice ragged. Summoning the last of his strength, he forced his eyes upward toward Nathan. But the young swordsman was already sprinting past him, charging the other mist ninjas who had gathered nearby. Anger flared in the dying man's chest, an anger utterly useless now. With a wet crack, his upper body slumped forward, collapsing against the earth and twisting into an even more pitiable shape. No one paused to look at him. Nathan, having confirmed that his first opponent was beyond saving, whirled to face the remaining assailants. In swift succession he struck, and the clearing erupted with the crisp clang of steel meeting steel. Nathan moved like a phantom, sword in hand, slicing through the hidden mist's mid-level genin before they could even register his presence. In the span of a few heartbeats, he felled one opponent, and that was only the beginning. Another breath later, 2 more warriors lay dead at his feet. The scene replayed the same nightmare they had witnessed when the white mist was blown away, a merciless slaughter carried out with effortless precision. Fear rippled through the remaining mist ninjas. One by one, they instinctively fell back, encircling Nathan at a cautious distance. He regarded them with unwavering calm. When one fighter's power so vastly outstrips the rest, sheer numbers no longer guarantee safety. Bolstered by the Sharingan's piercing insight and his own superhuman reflexes, Nathan could and would pick them off one by one. Chapter 609, The End and Protective Color. The forest rang with the clash of steel and shouts of combat. Nathan surveyed the mist ninjas pressing in on him, torn between his usual breakneck killing pace and the temptation to siphon their chakra. After all, at 2,000 chakra points per second, he could empty a body in mere moments. Yet in a fierce battle, even a single second's hesitation shattered rhythm, and that kind of pause could cost him everything. Prolonging each kill to harvest chakra simply wasn't an option on this chaotic front. Nathan's gaze flicked toward Hinata Camellia, who hovered at the edge of the fray. He ached to lift the guardian seal between his brows and unleash his Byakugan, prying every secret from the surrounding trees. But exposing that power here would be foolhardy, and Hinata's perceptiveness made discovery all too likely. Besides, the Byakugan's reach barely stretched a kilometer, no distance at all for a trained shinobi advancing at full stride. With the enemy closing in on every side, Nathan bit back his urge to reveal more than necessary and readied himself for the next whirlwind of blades. Nathan knew that once he'd zeroed in on their position, he could close the gap in a minute or two, so he resolved to end the fight quickly. He had no appetite for needless complications. With that in mind, he surged into action against the mist ninjas. Then a sharp whistle split the air. Nathan stopped dead, eyes sweeping the trees for its source. Up ahead, he spotted an injured Kirigakure Jonin, the same shinobi 2 Konoha Jonin had been trying to overwhelm, limping away. The Jonin pressed a whistle to his lips with one hand, the other clutching his wounded left arm, as he disappeared deeper into the forest. Nathan didn't know the secret code, but the mist ninjas, Reaction spoke volumes. At the whistle's call, they began slipping away from the skirmish, melting back into the jungle's shadows. It was clearly their signal to retreat. With no pressing need to finish off every last enemy on the spot, Nathan eased up on his pace, letting the others spread out ahead. He zeroed in on a lone Kirigakure Chunin, retreating into the forest edge. In a flash, Nathan struck, 2 precise blows that sent the shinobi stumbling. As the Chunin faltered, Nathan's hand shot out, sealing the chakra absorption technique. Dark tendrils of stolen energy siphoned into him, even as he urged his quarry deeper among the towering pines. Thus began a high-stakes chase through the underbrush. Up ahead, Kirigakure forces scattered in every direction, desperate to escape. Behind them, Konoha shinobi pressed the pursuit without hesitation. The sharp clash of kunai and shuriken, ding ding, reverberated through the trees, each metallic ring sending birds shrieking skyward. 15 minutes later, the hunt finally ceased. Nathan and the 2 other Konoha Jonin called off their teams, rounding up both men and mounts to return to the main clearing. There they issued orders at once. Detachments swept the battlefield for discarded weapons and eliminated telling tracks, while the medical corps moved in to treat the wounded. Every soldier fell into disciplined silence, carrying out tasks with brisk efficiency. Nathan didn't tarry. He spotted a comrade slumped against a broken branch, his uniform stained dark. Rushing forward, Nathan knelt beside the seriously injured shinobi, already focusing his healing chakra on the worst of the wounds, determined to save as many lives as possible before the day was through. Nathan moved swiftly along the line of fallen shinobi, evaluating each man's injuries in seconds. His fingers traced chakra seals in the air, and with precise hand seals, he wove several advanced medical ninjutsu over a wounded shoulder here, a deep gash there. Once he had stabilized the first casualty, he jumped to the next, repeating the process until every seriously wounded ninja at the scene had at least a fighting chance to survive. A handful of Konoha shinobi hovered at his side, wordlessly passing him fresh bandages and chakra sustaining, charged salves whenever he needed them. They didn't speak. No one dared interrupt the silence that had settled over them as Nathan worked. 15 minutes later, he straightened up, chakra spent but steady, and offered a relieved sigh. "All right," he said, brushing invisible dust from his uniform. "Everyone's stabilized. Get some rest and we'll arrange transport back to Konoha once we regroup." The final ninja, his voice rough with pain, managed a nod and croaked, "Thank you, Nathan. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Nathan gave him a small, tired smile. "Just focus on healing. We'll handle the rest." Nathan was well aware that not every support team captain in the shinobi world could boast medical ninjutsu as advanced as his own. When the 2 Konoha Jonin, their faces lined with relief, offered him thanks, Nathan simply gave a curt nod and said nothing more. Rising to his feet, he crossed the small clearing and addressed them both directly. "Their injuries are nearly stable. We can move out." "Understood," one of the Jonin replied without hesitation. Both of them quickly checked their remaining squad members, ensuring the wounded were secure on their makeshift stretchers. With Nathan's 10 remaining medics falling into step behind, they set off for the safety of the main camp. Victory, they all knew, had come at a steep price. Nathan's support operation had once consisted of 4 distinct teams, 17 shinobi in all. Now only 11 remained. 6 of his comrades had fallen, 2 struck down during a chance encounter with a Mist Country support unit on the march, and 4 lost in the fierce engagement that had preceded this rescue. It was Nathan's decisive intervention, eliminating an enemy Jonin and 2 special Jonin in rapid succession, that had broken the opposing force's spirit and stalled their advance. Without that surgical strike, the outcome might have been far more catastrophic. As the party disappeared into the dusk, their silhouettes backlit by the fading sun, Nathan allowed himself a moment to reflect on the cost of their success and steel himself for the battles yet to come. Nathan paused at the edge of the clearing and surveyed the weary column of refugees trudging behind him. He couldn't help but imagine how many had already fallen before his arrival in Konoha, lives extinguished in the chaos of war. That was precisely why he insisted on accompanying them personally, to shield every last soul from the lurking threat of the Mist Shinobi who might have picked them off in transit. Reputation can be burdensome, Nathan reflected, but it can also serve as a shield. By distinguishing himself in battle and continuously tending to the wounded afterward, he was deliberately forging public goodwill, an insurance policy against any backroom politics. His eyes flicked to the horizon, where the village's spires glittered in the setting sun. Soon he planned to move against Danzo. Officially, Danzo's standing in Konoha had already suffered, but he still wielded considerable influence as a high-ranking elder. Any direct challenge would undoubtedly rile his supporters, giving them ammunition to stir up dissent. Nathan wasn't naive. He understood how quickly public sentiment could be manipulated. Cultivation, after all, demanded peace of mind and an environment free from political strife. If he could avoid a full-blown confrontation, he would. Yet he also recognized that decisive action might be unavoidable if Danzo continued his clandestine plots. That was why Nathan was building his reputation now, so that when the time came, any attempt to smear him would falter against the hard-earned trust he'd sown among the villagers. As the refugees reached the relative safety of Konoha's gates, Nathan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had shepherded them through danger, kept them from harm, and in doing so prepared a formidable bulwark against the slander that might follow his move against Danzo. For anyone hoping to unmask him or tarnish his name after the fact, it would be nearly impossible. With each Ife he saved, and every debt of gratitude he accrued, Nathan forged an impervious defense of loyalty and respect, ensuring that when the day of reckoning came, he would not stand alone. Nathan never underestimated the 5 great shinobi villages. After all, the most essential skill of a ninja is gathering intelligence, and the Big 5, dedicated as they are to training elite operatives, excel at it. When they focus their resources, uncovering every scrap of information is just a matter of time. And once suspicion falls, Konoha doesn't even need hard proof. They only need a plausible suspect. Given Nathan's history of skirmishes with Root, he would be their prime target. With that in mind, Nathan made his preparations. He didn't fear Konoha, nor had he bound his fate to the Leaf Village alone. It was simply that he had grown comfortable here, accustomed to its rhythms and alliances. More than that, he found a certain thrill in watching the true protagonist of this story refine his talents. If Nathan could continue training undisturbed and keep an eye on events from the shadows, it might just turn into the most entertaining mission of all. Chapter 610, Perfection. The feared Miss Ninja ambush never materialized. Nathan and his team returned to camp without incident. After reporting their success to the mission office, Nathan dismissed everyone and decided to practice alone. It was still early, and he felt no urge to remain within the camp's walls all day. Using his wind-release wind wings at perfect level, 7 in the grading system, he created a shadow clone to guard the camp and slipped away. He wasn't worried about leaving. His mental prowess easily supported the mind-opening technique, allowing him to stay in telepathic contact with the clone over distances exceeding 100 kilometers. In other words, so long as he remained within that radius, he could monitor camp activity at any time. And thanks to his mastery of wind wings, he could cover those distances in minutes. From 100 kilometers out, he'd need no more than 6 minutes to return. If he stayed closer, say, only 50 kilometers, he could be back in as little as 2 or 3. Even if his clone ran into trouble, Nathan was confident the patrol could hold out until he arrived. With those assurances, Nathan soared off toward the horizon, ready to refine his skills in solitude. Nathan understood all too well why Nara Keimitsu turned a blind eye to his frequent absences. Even with dozens of Byakugan users stationed in the camp, none had detected that his body was missing. While the Byakugan can't distinguish between a shadow clone and the original, it does reveal the exact amount of chakra present, and Keimitsu had surely noticed that one body's chakra signature was missing. In other words, Nathan had been leaving only a shadow clone behind, yet Keimitsu never objected. That was no mere oversight, it was deliberate tolerance. Puzzled but determined, Nathan spread his wings and soared toward his training ground, cutting through the sky so swiftly that the wind slashed at him like countless knives. Raising his hand, he formed a rapid sequence of seals and unleashed his ninjutsu. Chakra Hagoromo. A soft green aura blossomed around him, coalescing into a coat of shimmering, feather-like chakra. The knife-edge winds rattled against this ethereal plumage, causing only a subtle ripple across its surface. Protected by his chakra feathers, Nathan flew on, unimpeded, ready to push his training to new heights. Nathan stood in the clearing, examining the glowing feather coat that hovered around him. Even without the faint chakra aura shimmering at its edges, it would have passed for a real garment. This was no mere trick of light. It was the result of yesterday's breakthrough. After more than 20 days of relentless training, his chakra Hagoromo had finally risen to level 8. Level 8 fell just one step short of the theoretical maximum, but its improvements were already striking. The lifelike appearance was only the most obvious change. More important was the coat's enhanced defensive power against ninjutsu. With the Hagoromo active, almost every evasive jutsu, save for certain fire-based escape techniques, could be stopped outright if their strength was C rank or lower. Even more remarkable, the upgrade had granted the Hagoromo an endless property. As long as Nathan maintained a sufficient chakra reserve, the coat could regenerate itself almost instantly after taking damage, provided the initial assault didn't shatter its endurance threshold in a single blow. Essentially, so long as he could feed it chakra faster than his opponent could break it, the coat would remain whole. Nathan flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar surge of power coursing through him. This new level of resilience would change everything. Now he was ready to test the limits of his chakra Hagoromo and to face whatever challenges lay ahead with confidence. Nathan dispatched a shadow clone to probe the limits of his chakra Hagoromo. The results were unmistakable. Unless the barrier was struck by more than 10 D-rank ninjutsu in a single second, it simply wouldn't break. Against C-rank techniques, its threshold drop ed to 2 hits within that same window. As long as no more than 2 C-rank attacks landed in 1 second, the chakra Hagoromo held steadfast, guaranteeing his safety. He hasn't yet tested the defense with his true body against B-rank ninjutsu. His clone was already obliterated by a single blow. That suggests he's reached the technique's limit for now, and any attempt to withstand stronger attacks would likely injure him. But this ceiling won't remain forever. Once Chakra Hagoromo advances to level 9, it will undergo a qualitative transformation, almost certainly enabling it to absorb B-rank assaults, or even more powerful jutsu, without faltering. And this is all with ordinary chakra. When Nathan masters Sage Mode and taps into Celestial Chakra, he'll be able to evolve Chakra Hagoromo into a full-fledged Celestial Guardian focused entirely on defense. At that stage, enduring B-rank ninjutsu will be trivial, and A-rank and S-rank techniques will be well within his grasp. Nathan had intended this technique as a last resort, but by now, it had almost become routine. At his current skill level, no enemy could volley high-powered ninjutsu at him fast enough to break through his defenses. In theory, he could withstand dozens of assaults. If he maintained the right cadence, his chakra feather cloak would remain intact until every drop of chakra was spent. Before he knew it, Nathan touched down in a remote jungle 50 kilometers from the outskirts of Eugen Port. From here, returning to camp would take him no more than 3 minutes. He formed a hand seal, releasing the guardian seal between his brows. His eyes turned a milky white as he circled the area, confirming he was alone. Satisfied, he drifted back to the forest floor. Without hesitation, he performed the Shadow Clone Jutsu. 20 Nathans sprang into being. Together, they launched into the rigorous training routine he had planned. Sunset yielded to moonrise. Shadows lengthened and then vanished in the deep of night. The campfire's glow flickered on leaf and branch as Nathan and his clones pushed through exhaustion, each strike and counterstrike echoing steadily under the stars. Nathan sat cross-legged at the edge of the forest, alternating between the Palm Immortal technique and the Reflection Heart technique, fortifying his body while guiding his Sharingan toward its next evolution. Normally, he would have completed these advanced drills back at camp, but tonight he'd stayed late in the wild. The reason was simple. His Rasengan was on the verge of an upgrade. He'd been told the enhancement could manifest as early as this very night and no later than tomorrow. Determined to wield the improved Rasengan on the next mission, Nathan siphoned off a portion of his chakra and devoted it entirely to refining the technique. One by one, Dozens of shadow clones sprang into being around him, each focusing on sculpting the spiraling chakra sphere in its palm. After what felt like hours, Nathan's eyes snapped open. He surveyed the rhythmic motion of his clones, hands rotating, chakra coalescing, set against the moonlit trees. "Almost there," he whispered. With a single, fluid hand seal, he activated the shadow clone technique in reverse, causing all the clones to vanish in a soft eruption of chakra smoke. In the sudden quiet, memories flooded Nathan's mind. The first time he'd formed a Rasengan, the countless attempts that ended in failure, and every small breakthrough that led him here. Standing alone in the clearing, he sensed the new power of the Rasengan stirring within him, ready at last. Nathan focused intently, absorbing the memories and muscle memory of each shadow clone's Rasengan practice. Unlike before, when he had to sift through wildly different experiences, now every clone had trained the same technique, and that uniformity let him integrate their lessons in record time. Minutes later, he opened his eyes, a spark of insight lighting them. He raised his right hand, and a pale blue orb of chakra materialized in his palm. It spun silently, radiating neither heat nor threat. Since reaching level 900 perfect state, the Rasengan's formation speed and concealment had improved noticeably over its level 8 form. In the past, Nathan reserved the technique for only the most flawless openings. Now, even imperfect chances were enough to unleash a potent Rasengan with minimal loss of power. That alone would be a tremendous advantage in any battle, but it was far from Nathan's only gain. With each training cycle, his control over chakra had grown sharper, his reflexes snappier, and his strategic vision clearer. As he felt the Rasengan humming in his hand, he knew he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Moreover, now that Nathan has perfected the Rasengan, it's much easier for him to train in the wind release, Rasen Shuriken. Chapter 611, Impact and Acceleration. The instant Nathan summoned the thought, a swirling ball of chakra, a Rasengan, materialized in his palm. He poured in a powerful stream of wind chakra, reshaping the attack. 4 razor-sharp wind blades spun violently around the core, tearing at the surrounding air with a harsh, screaming friction. In that charged moment, Nathan's hair whipped around his face, and the sting of displaced wind cut at his cheeks. This wasn't any ordinary ninjutsu, it was the S-rank forbidden technique, wind-style Rasen Shuriken. Nathan steadied himself, cradling the humming giant shuriken in his hand. He felt its immense power, preparing to hurl it at his target, but to his dismay he couldn't release it. "It still won't work?" he muttered, frustration cracking his voice. Desperate to test its strength, he slammed the spinning Rasen Shuriken against a massive tree nearby. Even with every ounce of restraint he could muster, the wind blades shredded the trunk at once, splintering it into chunks rather than mere bark and wood. Nathan stepped back, staring at the devastation. He knew this technique was unstoppable once unleashed, but controlling it remained a challenge. And as the dust settled, he realized the bigger battle was only just beginning. Nathan's wind-style Rasen Shuriken struck at the cellular level. The massive tree trunk didn't just split, it shattered into powder that scattered and vanished on the rising breeze. With a thunderous crack, the canopy above collapsed, raining branches, flowers, and leaves over a wide swath of the forest floor. Nathan activated Chakra Feather Garb and the Earth-style hardening technique in tandem, propelling himself clear of the falling debris. When he landed, he brought his right arm up sharply and winced at the sight of tiny beads of blood seeping from his skin. The notorious backlash of the wind-style Rasen Shuriken still haunted him. He forced himself not to frown. After all, this new technique was simply the next evolution of his Earth-style Rasengan, not a revision of the wind-style Rasen Shuriken itself. Its persistent flaw, its toll on the user, hadn't yet been resolved. What mattered most was that his Rasengan had reached its peak form, enabling the wind-style Rasen Shuriken to mature and grow stronger far more rapidly than before. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. Around him, the forest lay in ruin, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had unlocked a power that, with time and practice, would surpass its current drawbacks. And when that day came, his enemies would finally know the full force of his wind-style technique. By midday, Nathan had brought 4 ninjutsu to perfection. 3 of them, wind-style, vacuum jade, wind-style, vacuum blade, and wind style, wind devouring, are all B-rank wind techniques. Mastering these skills raised his command of wind chakra to a new level, strengthening the two fundamental components of his wind style Rasen Shuriken. As a result, his rate of improvement accelerated dramatically. Nathan estimated that from now on he would need only about 100 chakra points to earn a single increment of proficiency with the Rasen Shuriken, half the cost he paid before. In other words, every unit of chakra he spends now yields roughly 50% more progress. What made this breakthrough even more significant was the boost to his daily chakra reserves. With the Rasengan perfected, he could draw an extra 50,000 chakra points each day. Determined to master his signature move, Nathan resolved to pour all of that newfound energy into honing the wind-style Rasen Shuriken. Accounting for his efficiency bonus, Nathan will gain roughly 1,590 proficiency points in wind style, Rasen Shuriken, every day from now on. At that pace, collecting the 50,000 points needed to raise the technique from level 8 to 9 won't pose much of a challenge. Nathan exhaled in relief, opened his skill panel, and shifted his focus to chakra control. Perfecting the Rasengan hadn't just accelerated his progress with the wind-style Rasen Shuriken, his chakra control proficiency had soared as well. The level 6 progress bar was already nearly halfway full. Of course, this dramatic surge wasn't down to the Rasengan alone. Earlier that day, he'd refined 4 other ninjutsu as well. Still, none of them matched the Rasengan's transformative effect. While mastering those techniques would deepen his control over their specific chakra natures, perfecting the Rasengan delivered a comprehensive boost to his overall chakra manipulation. Nathan's enhanced chakra control meant he could now unleash far more powerful jutsu with less energy and pick up new techniques more quickly. Still, these benefits weren't what excited him most. What he really craved was the ability to channel an enormous surge of chakra all at once. Fine-tuned precision only carries you so far. Nathan preferred the battlefield philosophy of Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama, brute force overwhelm. He'd seen firsthand how a single colossal fireball could wipe out an entire squad. No amount of subtle chakra manipulation could match that kind of raw destructive power unless you had the perfect technique in your arsenal. It's the old truism at work. Overwhelming force beats 10 clever tricks every time. Of course, harnessing that magnitude of chakra safely demanded terrifying levels of control. Lose your focus, and you risk a backlash that could tear you apart. Nathan shuddered at the thought of fireballs detonating all around him, an uncontrollable inferno born of his own ambition. Nathan's growing mastery of chakra control had significantly enhanced his abilities. He estimated that, if he unleashed every last ounce of his power, he could channel over 3,000 chakra points in a single release. With that much chakra driving his fire release fireball technique, the ball of flame would span at least 35 meters in diameter. Although that's only about 5 meters larger than his limit a few months ago, the corresponding increase in volume and destructive potential would be considerable. Fire release fireball technique, Nathan muttered to himself. The name felt underwhelming. Still, after a moment's thought, he dismissed the idea of renaming it. Titles were just words. What truly mattered was the jutsu's power. If the technique was strong enough, nobody would dare underestimate it, no matter how modest the name. With that settled, Nathan turned his attention to another skill, the chakra absorption technique. Over the past few days of non-stop fighting, he had relied on it repeatedly, honing its subtleties each time he used it. Nathan spent the next few moments fine-tuning his progress toward his goal, and the results were encouraging. Thanks to the proficiency panel, his progress bar inched forward, bringing him one step closer to the flawless state required for a level 7 promotion. He estimated that once it reached the perfect 0-0 mark and underwent its next qualitative transformation, it would more or less meet his expectations. He closed the panel and glanced up at the sky. Time was running out. Without hesitation, Nathan formed the necessary hand seals and unleashed 2 jutsu in rapid succession. Wind release, wind wings, followed by chakra feather garment. A soft, feather-like aura wrapped around him, and in an instant he beat his chakra wings, propelling himself toward the camp at top speed. Chapter 612, Decisive Battle. When Nathan returned to camp that evening, he didn't head straight to his tent. First, he went to the training grounds to drill his palm immortal technique and mirror heart method until he'd fulfilled his plan for the day. Only then did he allow himself a moment's rest. Over the next few days, Nathan fell into a steady rhythm, missions by daylight, intensive practice by moonlight. But as the front line heated up, distress calls came with growing frequency, and daylight hours for splitting shadow clones all but vanished. To make up the difference, he slipped out of camp after dark, creating extra clones and running through his drills under the stars. Fortunately, every combat assignment offered him the chance to draw chakra from the Mist Ninja under his protection. Even after covering his losses in battle, he still had ample reserves left over. Those surplus chakra stores fully compensated for the strain of his midnight cloning sessions. In the end, his training remained on track, and he continued to grow stronger despite the war's relentless pace. Only the Palm Immortal technique and the Reflection Heart technique still demanded Nathan's personal attention, and both were painstakingly slow to master. As a result, his training had fallen behind the original timetable. There was nothing he could do but hope the war would end before his skills became a liability. Fortunately, Nathan wouldn't have to wait long. 3 days later, an urgent dispatch from Nara Chiguang arrived. A decisive engagement was about to begin amid their support operation. The reason for the sudden order was straightforward. Sensing they were losing the upper hand, the Kirigakure forces had brazenly raided the Konoha camp. In retaliation, Nara Chiguang commanded Nathan and several veteran shinobi on the front line to abandon their current objectives and strike Yujin Port, where a Kirigakure detachment had been left to regroup. Both armies were now racing toward Huanglong, determined to settle the conflict once and for all. Deep in the forest, Nathan studied the sealed orders one last time. He released his messenger hawk, watching it vanish into the treetops, then turned to face the waiting squads. 4 teams stood in formation behind him, 16 of Konoha's finest shinobi, their faces set with resolve. Nathan took a steadying breath. It was time to move out. Nathan's rescue squad was perpetually at full strength. Whenever someone fell in the field, a replacement arrived by dawn. 16 men strong, the only members Nathan truly knew were Hyuga Yamacha, his oldest and most trusted lieutenant, and a handful of capable chunin. The rest rotated so frequently that Nathan barely recognized them, though they all seemed to know him well, especially Yamacha, who'd served under him the longest. Noticing Nathan's tense expression, Yamacha spoke up first. "Captain, have we received new orders from command?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "The decisive battle has begun." "The decisive battle?" Yamacha's voice cracked with surprise, and the rest of the squad exchanged stunned looks. They'd all known an all-out confrontation was coming. It just hadn't been supposed to happen so soon. Nathan cut in before anyone could respond. "The Mist Shinobi have launched a full-scale attack on our headquarters camp at Yujin Port. Command has just declared the decisive battle officially underway." One of the Mist-hidden ninjas blinked, recovering from the shock. "Then, should we fall back to the rear camp and reinforce them?" "No," Nathan replied, shaking his head. "A separate squad is holding the camp. Our orders are to infiltrate and raid Yujin Port itself." Raid Yujin Port. The words hung in the air, met by a ripple of uneasy expressions. Deep behind enemy lines, no position would be truly safe, and Yujin Port was heavily fortified. Yet even as grim calculations flashed through their minds, none spoke further objections. They trusted Nathan. His skill in combat was legendary, and he was a master of medical ninjutsu. Should any of them fall in the heat of battle, Nathan could staunch their wounds and give them a chance to survive. In that knowledge, they found a measure of calm amid the storm about to break. Nathan took in the determined faces around him and issued a single, unwavering command. "All units, advance on Yujin Port, now!" "Yes, Captain," his teams echoed back the response in perfect unison. Without hesitation, they pivoted and surged forward under Nathan's lead, plunging deeper into the forest toward their objective. Any thought of the stranded rescue party had to be set aside. Seizing Yujin Port was their top priority. Nathan silently apologized to those they left behind, hoping fate would be kind to them. They moved swiftly along the narrow woodland trails and soon ran into another squad of Konoha shinobi. After a brief exchange of tactical updates, confirming they too were bound for Yujin Port, the two groups fell in beside one another and pressed on together. With every mile they covered, more allied units joined their column, transforming a handful of Jonin into a formidable force. Just as the combined contingents began to swell, Nathan's radio crackled to life. Headquarters was sending fresh orders. He glanced at his fellow Jonin, steeled himself for what came next, and prepared to lead them into the heart of enemy territory. An older Jonin had been named temporary captain to coordinate the operation. His orders were straightforward and to the point. Divide into 3 fan-shaped assault teams and strike Yujin Port simultaneously from the west, the southwest, and the northwest. Nathan didn't object. In a battle of this scale, raw strength often mattered more than elaborate stratagems. Subtle deceptions had their place, but when hundreds of shinobi clashed, simplicity could be every bit as effective. Nathan led a force of about 100 shinobi, including several fellow Jonin and their squads, taking the northwest approach. The Konoha army's buildup was impossible to hide, yet the hidden mist made no move to intercept. Either they were fully committed to their offensive against the Konoha camp, or they simply lacked the reserves to split off and defend Yujin Port as well. With the enemy's attention elsewhere, Nathan's unit pressed on, ready to bring overwhelming force to bear on the port's defenses. At last, every squad, including Nathan's, converged on Yujin Port from the 3 approach routes. There was no parley. The moment they made contact, it turned into a fight to the death. Outside the port there were no trees, but inside the buildings were densely packed, and mostly wooden, making the entire area a tinderbox. Seizing the advantage, Nathan mounted an aerial position and tapped into his deepest reserves of chakra. Then, with a resounding roar, he unleashed his signature ninjutsu, fire style, great fireball technique. Above the battleground, he condensed a sphere of flame over 30 meters across. Its searing heat and blinding light froze all who witnessed it. Mist shinobi below halted mid-strike, and even the Konoha team poised outside momentarily faltered. Wasting no time, Nathan threw the colossal fireball downward. From the port's wooden plank flooring, several towering columns of water shot up, slamming into the inferno. Yet their timing was off, their power scattered. They only managed to slow the fireball's descent instead of putting it out. The giant blaze continued plummeting toward Yujin Port, promising devastation the moment it struck. A Kirigakure Jonin barked out, "Fall back!" The mist shinobi, already on edge, fled like startled rabbits. In an instant, the entire area descended into chaos. Chapter 613, Invasion Boom. A thunderous explosion ripped through the air. Nathan's fireball detonated before it even touched the ground, raining down a cascade of flames like a fiery meteor shower across a 200 to 300 meter radius. "Get out of the way! Watch yourselves!" Ah! Panic spread through the ranks of the mist ninjas below as they scattered like startled insects through the winding streets of Yujin Port. From the edge of the blast zone, a Konoha shinobi seized the moment. "Attack!" he roared, leading a squad of fellow Konoha warriors into the chaos. In an instant, the battle turned even more chaotic. Several mist ninjas caught on the perimeter fell within seconds. Recognizing the imminent threat, the mist hidden forces sounded a retreat. The front lines collapsed, and the fighting shifted deeper into the heart of the port. Here, the mist ninjas' intimate knowledge of every alleyway and back corridor paid off. They regrouped swiftly, reforming defensive positions that choked the Konoha advance. Narrow lanes and hidden vantage points allowed them to stem the invaders' momentum and stabilize the situation. High above the conflict, Nathan hovered on his stamina-charged wings, watching the ebb and flow of battle. After a brief pause, gauging where his intervention would matter most, he dove back toward the fray, ready to tip the scales in Konoha's favor. Before the two sides, shinobi could completely intermix, Nathan whirled around and formed a hand seal. "Fire style! Great fireball technique!" he shouted. Instantly, a pillar of flame erupted from his mouth, a roaring sphere over 30 meters across, like a miniature sun, smashing into the ground before the mist ninjas. But his assault didn't have the impact he'd hoped for. 3 colossal water dragons leapt skyward, their glistening coils striking the inferno in unison. After a tense moment of collision, the beast's torrents snuffed out the fireball, scattering its embers harmlessly. Nathan's Sharingan flicked over the battlefield. Amid the haze of steam, he spotted 3 special-class mist shinobi hidden among the enemy ranks. They'd been the ones who'd conjured those water dragons, and moments earlier, they'd blended their liquid assault with the mist-style's signature obscuring cloak. In a heartbeat, dense white fog had spilled across a wide swath of the field. Fortunately for the Leaf, a veteran shinobi raised a palm and summoned a howling gale to disperse the mist. But as the fog lifted, Nathan saw his opponent seize the chance. The mist warriors who'd been lurking at the rear charged forward, crashing into Konoha's line. Now, the two forces were fully entangled, shinobi from both sides locked in a fierce melee. Nathan tightened his grip on his kunai, ready for whatever came next. Nathan could no longer rely on powerful ninjutsu to strike from a distance, exactly what Kirigakure's 3 special jonin had been counting on. "What a pity," he muttered, beating his wings and plummeting toward them like a living missile. The 3 jonin didn't flee. Instead, they fanned out into a precise triangle, deliberately leaving a gap in the middle. In perfect synchronization, each of them hurled a handful of kunai fitted with explosive tags. High above, Nathan's Sharingan flared. In an instant, he calculated every kunai's trajectory, twisting his body to slip through the lethal volley. With a sudden burst of speed, he darted past their defenses and dropped behind the nearest jonin, his eyes locked on the target. Without hesitation, he threw a single shuriken. As his fingers formed quick seals, the blade split in 2, then 4, then 8, until 100 steel stars tore through the air, each one aimed to overwhelm the Kirigakure special jonin. "Be careful!" one of the 2 Kirigakure special jonin cried from the edge of the clearing. In a heartbeat, the 3rd jonin vanished from Nathan's initial attack zone, reappearing just beyond the strike. With a sharp pivot, he brought his kunai up in a single fluid motion. Steel rang on steel as hail. He deflected the shuriken volley, though in truth, he dodged the vast majority the moment Nathan unleashed them. Only a dozen blades, guided by Nathan's chakra, ever reached him. Had he faced the full barrage head-on, even his skill wouldn't have saved him. Nathan dropped lightly to the ground, eyes fixed on his 3 opponents. He alone stood poised against them, but his confidence was undiminished. Across from him, the 3 Kirigakure jonin exchanged uneasy glances. Nathan's reputation had spread fast. In recent weeks, he had cut down several of their comrades, always outnumbered, yet never defeated. Now, as the tension crackled between them, the 3 hesitated, each wondering if today would finally be the day they stamped out his threat. The 3 Kirigakure special jonin tensed the moment Nathan appeared before them. Sensing their unease, Nathan drew the long sword from his waist and strode forward without hesitation. As he advanced, he quickly wove the necessary hand seals, wiped the blade with the back of his palm, and unleashed his signature wind release, vacuum blade. The jonin's eyes flickered with alarm. Intelligence reports from their village had warned that Nathan's vacuum blade could sever an opponent's weapon in a single strike. A direct clash would be nothing short of suicide. With that realization, all 3 fell back at once, maintaining distance as they formed seals of their own and launched a trio of ninjutsu attacks at him. But Nathan's reaction speed was inhuman. Thanks to his Sharingan, he read each of their patterns instantaneously. Channeling chakra into his feet, he activated his instant sword technique, moving like a blurred flash. He sidestepped one blast, somersaulted clear of another, and slipped under the 3rd, emerging unscathed and still on the offensive. Boom, boom, boom. Explosive bursts of chakra-filled air detonated around Nathan, ripping holes in the surrounding buildings, but leaving him completely unscathed. Across the rubble-strewn courtyard, the 3 Kirigakure shinobi scowled in fury, and not without reason. Nathan didn't flinch. In a heartbeat, he vanished from sight and reappeared directly in front of the highest-ranking jonin. He leveled his razor-sharp blade at the jonin's throat. The seasoned ninja felt the biting chill of the blade's edge and instinctively sidestepped, his body coiling to evade. But Nathan was already in motion. With a flick of his wrist, the blade's trajectory shifted from an overhead slash to a horizontal cut aimed at the jonin's chest. The jonin's reflexes were impeccable. He arched his back and twisted away just in time. Nathan's long knife whistled past, grazing the jonin's tactical vest. Even though the blade didn't connect solidly, the signature wind-style vacuum blade technique attached to the edge shredded the outer layer of the Jonin's armor, sending tatters of fabric fluttering to the ground. Fortunately for him, the thick vest and its stashed ninja tools absorbed most of the force, leaving only a shallow tear. Nathan steadied his grip, eyes locked on each of his three opponents. The destroyed buildings behind them rattled with smaller aftershocks, but in this tense moment, all that mattered was the spark of steel and the promise of the next move. Nathan snapped his arm back just in time. Those tiny wind blades clinging to the weapon would have shredded his flesh otherwise. He locked eyes on the Kirigakure Special Jonin, sprinting away, and took a step forward, ready to strike again. But before he could move, a volley of shuriken hurtled in from his flank. Nathan barely twisted aside and saw a second Special Jonin emerge, forcing him to dodge another surprise assault. No sooner had he regained his stance than a third adversary unleashed a water escape jutsu. In an instant, dozens of razor-sharp blades of water hurtled toward him, driving him into a hasty retreat. By the time the spray dissipated, Nathan was too far from his original target to mount another attack. Chapter 6 and 14, Forced Killing. Nathan retreated 2 steps, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the 3 Mist Village shinobi fanning out before him in a precise pinwheel formation. All around him, the clash of steel and the thrum of chakra filled the air, but for the moment, neither side flinched. A sudden gust of wind whipped Nathan's long bangs across his face, momentarily masking his vision. Seizing the opportunity, the 3 attackers launched their assault in perfect synchrony. The first hurled a volley of razor-sharp shuriken, aiming at Nathan's throat, chest, and abdomen to close off any escape. The second leapt forward, brandishing twin wakizashi nearly as long as his forearms, intent on a brutal up-close strike. The third shinobi's hands blurred in a complex seal as he prepared a deadly ninjutsu. With a blink, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. Every movement, every flash of steel was tracked with millisecond precision. He responded instantly, drawing and flicking an equal number of shuriken into the air to intercept the incoming blades. Metal rang out as the 2 sets of projectiles collided, spraying fragments in a shimmering arc around him. "Not today," Nathan muttered under his breath. He let the scattering shuriken fall, then shifted his stance, ready for the next wave of attacks. The misty battlefield stilled for a heartbeat, but both sides knew the deadlock wouldn't last. Nathan leapt backward, narrowly evading the twin sword slash of the second Kirigakure Special Jonin. Undeterred, the Jonin pressed forward, blades flashing in a deadly rhythm. Nathan's eyes narrowed. With a swift hand seal, he unleashed his earth-style, hardening technique. A soft, pearly glow rippled across his skin, turning his fair flesh almost translucent, like living jade. The Jonin's swords bit into Nathan's defense, but found no purchase. Instead, his clothing split in several places, ripping under the force of the strike, while his body remained unmarked. Nathan paused only long enough to note the jagged tears in his tunic before his gaze drifted to the third Kirigakure Jonin circling into position. In truth, even if he had devoted himself entirely to evasion, the Jonin's speed alone wouldn't have been enough to land a hit. Nathan had chosen to absorb the blow with his hardened earth armor rather than waste chakra on endless dodges, an efficient, unflappable defense befitting a shinobi of his caliber. Nathan braced himself for the third Kirigakure Special Jonin's assault. He watched as the opponent's hands flew through the final seals, summoning a familiar, but suddenly far more potent, water-style technique. In an instant, hundreds of razor-sharp water blades condensed in midair, hurtling toward him like a merciless hailstorm. His Sharingan flared to life, the crimson tomoe spinning in his irises. Reacting with lightning speed, Nathan formed the seals for his own jutsu, water-style, water array wall. Years of relentless training had honed this barrier to perfection, and with barely a moment's hesitation, a towering curtain of churning water sprang to life before him. The oncoming blades struck the wall in a cascade of splintering water, creating dozens of spinning whirlpools, but not one of them pierced his defense. For several breathless seconds the torrent raged on, then suddenly stilled as the enemy's attack ground to a halt. Safely shielded, Nathan steadied his stance and readied himself for whatever came next. The water blades dissolved first, followed by the water wall. Before Nathan could lower his hands, the Kirigakure special Jonin, who'd just fallen back with twin swords, sprang forward again. Ahead of him, a volley of kunai streaked through the air, tossed by the same Jonin who'd thrown shuriken moments earlier. Simultaneously, the third specialist, the one who'd just invoked ninjutsu, lifted his hands a second time, his gaze locked on Nathan's every move, searching for an opening. Their strategy was unmistakable. One warrior to lock him down in close quarters, another to pepper him with thrown weapons, and a third, cloaked in half chakra, waiting for the perfect moment to strike him dead. They'd formed a tightening net, determined to exhaust him. But while their plan was clever, their execution fell short. Had these been three true Jonin, Nathan might have hesitated. As it stood, caution was unnecessary. Nathan's hand flashed to the hilt of his long sword. A vibrant green light enveloped him as he activated the instant sword technique, and in an instant his speed doubled. He surged forward, weaving effortlessly between the hurtling kunai until he stood directly before the Mist Village ninja wielding twin swords. With two sharp clangs, Nathan met the ninja's blades head-on, deflecting both attacks in a single motion. Before his opponent could recover, Nathan sidestepped another incoming kunai and reappeared at the ninja's right flank. Swish, he swung his long sword in a wide, graceful arc. There wasn't time to form the seals for his full wind-style, vacuum blade, so he channeled pure wind chakra directly into the blade, sharpening its edge with raw power. The Kirigakure special Jonin spun on his heel, crossing his twin swords to block the strike, but the wind-infused blade still bit into his cheek, drawing a sharp gasp of pain. Nathan held his stance, his green-tinged eyes locking onto those of the wounded Jonin. Calm and focused, he prepared for whatever move came next. Nathan unleashed a subtle mental projection that slithered into his opponent's vision, intent on seizing control of his mind. But the Kirigakure special Jonin was far too alert. The instant he sensed something amiss, he backed away, melting into the shadows. Nathan allowed himself a brief, regretful smile. "What a shame," he murmured. Without pausing, Nathan surged forward, closing the distance in a single bound. His long sword flashed in a lethal arc, metal striking metal in a rapid-fire cadence. Ding! Dong! Ding! Two other special Jonin from Kirigakure moved to intercept, but their double-sword comrade was already on the defensive. Worse, recognition flitted across his eyes. He knew Nathan. No matter how fiercely his allies pressed their assault, he stayed fixated on Nathan alone. Under that relentless pressure, his form wavered, missteps beginning to crack his once impeccable defense. Nathan faced two elite Kirigakure ninja, one a dual sword specialist, the other a long-range weapons expert, each determined to take him down. The Blade Master lunged in perfect unison with his allies' barrage of kunai and shuriken, but Nathan met their assault with astonishing composure. His swords danced in his hands, parrying every strike, riposte following riposte. Even against two opponents, he steadily forced them backward, step by step. Suddenly, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life, its crimson glow surging with power. The weapons specialist who had just closed in to reinforce his partner froze in his tracks the moment their gazes locked. His hand trembled on the hilt of his blade, his eyes blank with sudden bewilderment. "Watch out!" the dual-sword ninja shouted, alarmed. He sprang forward, swinging both blades in a wide arc, hoping to break Nathan's stance and to snap his companion out of the Sharingan's trance. But the swordsman's fury had blinded him to Nathan's true intention. At the precise instant the Mist Ninja advanced, Nathan shifted his stance, closing the distance effortlessly. With his right blade, he intercepted the twin steel arcs, clashing them aside. Simultaneously, he thrust out his left hand, and in the palm of his glove, a pale blue orb of chakra blossomed, humming with latent energy. Time seemed to freeze as Nathan prepared to strike. The dual-wielding ninja's eyes flicked from the hypnotized comrade to the glowing sphere in Nathan's hand, and in that heartbeat, he understood the trap too late. Nathan's chakra grenade pulsed once, twice, and then shattered the stillness of the battlefield with its explosive force. This wasn't just any ninjutsu. It was the unregistered A-rank Rasengan. Now perfected to level 9, its chakra had never been so tightly concealed. Nathan deliberately closed the gap between himself and the two-sworded Mist Shinobi, ensuring there'd be no warning. Before the swordsman could react, the swirling orb of chakra slammed into his midsection with a deafening crack. Nathan's open palm drove into the shinobi's gut, and the impact lifted him clean off his feet. A geyser of blood burst from his mouth. He dropped both swords and fell like a stone. Junwoo! The Kirigakure special jonin roared as he snapped out of his stunned hesitation. He lunged forward, hurling a kunai straight at Nathan's throat. But Nathan's reflexes, sharpened by the Sharingan, were too quick. He twisted aside, letting the blade whistle past, then slashed backhanded at the jonin's neck. The razor edge of Nathan's blade found its mark in a spray of red. The would-be rescuer staggered, clutching at the wound, and collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the rasp of his last labored breaths. Nathan stood over him, chest heaving, gaze cold and unyielding. The battlefield had just claimed another victim, and the student of Kirigakure's fiercest secrets had made it look effortless. Nathan's blade whistled down with unerring precision, and a spike of panic shot through Fukui Takuichi's heart. He dropped into a low crouch, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the sword still grazed the top of his head, shearing off a few strands of hair. A cold bead of sweat trickled down his forehead as his pulse thundered in his ears. Nathan caught the flicker of fear in Takuichi's eyes, but pressed on without mercy. He reversed his grip and brought the long sword crashing back down at Takuichi's shoulder. Caught off guard, Takuichi had only enough time to raise his kunai in a desperate block. Metal rang against metal. Ding! But the force behind Nathan's swing was overwhelming. Within seconds, Takuichi was driven back. Seizing the moment, Nathan rammed the sword's tip into the ground. The blade sank deep into the earth, anchoring him in place. Takuichi, gathering his strength, thrust both feet against the soil and sprang backward. In a fluid motion, he landed lightly on a nearby wall, his eyes flicking toward Nathan in readiness for the next exchange. Nathan wrenched his sword free from the earth with a powerful tug, steel singing as it emerged. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, determined to keep the pressure relentless. But at that moment, a hailstorm of water needles shot in from the side, whipping past him like a torrential downpour. Nathan barely had time to flinch before he realized that both the 10 meters in front of him and the 10 meters behind were cloaked in those razor-sharp projectiles. Clearly, his attacker was determined to keep him from fleeing. He glanced up and saw the Mist Village's special operative, eyes burning with focus, as the ninja continued channeling the water blade ninjutsu. Unleashing such a vast barrage took careful preparation and perfect timing. In the wake of the ambush, Fukui Takuichi had already made his escape, and the twin-sword Mist Ninja had been driven off once more, leaving Nathan completely alone. Under these odds, most shinobi would be wounded, or worse. Nathan, however, reacted instinctively. The instant he registered the threat, he shot his hand forward to seal the signs and unleashed his own technique, Chakra Feather Garment. A faint shimmer of chakra blossomed across Nathan's skin, coalescing in an instant into his chakra feather coat. The hail of water needles slammed into the barrier with sharp splashes, but none pierced its surface. Only ripples marred the protective layer. Individually, the needles lacked the power to harm him, and even their overwhelming numbers were no match for a defense designed to absorb endless assaults. Had each needle been as potent as a D-rank jutsu, the outcome might have been different. But they were not. With the threat neutralized, Nathan wasted no time. He vanished from sight in a blur and reappeared beside his target, drawing his longsword as he executed the instant sword technique. On the wall above him, Fukui Takuichi froze, his back turned to the approaching strike. Realizing he couldn't afford to turn away, Takuichi gritted his teeth and raised his blade just in time. Steel rang against steel in a rapid series of clashes. Nathan moved like a wraith, pressing the attack relentlessly. Sparks flew along the wall's stone surface as he rained blows upon his adversary. After a few tense moments, several jagged scars appeared across Takuichi's armor and flesh, testament to Nathan's unerring strikes. During the skirmish, the Kirigakure shinobi specializing in water needle jutsu desperately sought an opening to strike, but Nathan was simply too fast. Every time the enemy began molding chakra for a water needle, Nathan's Sharingan warned him in advance. He'd pivot, using nearby buildings and even his struggling opponent, Fukui Takuichi, as impromptu shields. Frustrated, the Kirigakure ninja could only pepper Nathan with stray needles, none of which altered the course of the fight. A sharp ding rang out as Nathan's blade bit into Takuichi's armor once more. The older shinobi staggered, nearly toppling under the blow. Catching the moment, Nathan's eyes flashed. Channeling his chakra into the instant sword technique, he vanished in a streak of light and reappeared beside Takuichi. His greatsword arcs downward in a metallic roar. With a desperate roll, Takuichi evaded the slash, but Nathan was relentless. He pivoted on one heel and launched a flurry of sweeping steel strikes. Takuichi could only scrabble away, narrowly avoiding each blow as Nathan pressed the attack without mercy. Nathan pressed his attack relentlessly, knowing that in a duel, a long defense only invites defeat. After parrying strike after strike, Fukui Takuichi's reflexes finally faltered. With a single, precise swing, Nathan severed half of Takuichi's arm. "Ah!" Takuichi cried, teeth clenched against searing pain as he staggered backward. Nathan seized the moment, hurling a volley of kunai. Wounded and reeling, Takuichi managed to evade most of them, but one blade nicked his neck, spraying scarlet across his collar. Instinctively, he pressed a trembling hand to the wound and scrambled to put distance between himself and his unrelenting opponent. Nathan slowed for a heartbeat, eyes narrowing. What a pity, he thought. The kunai had only grazed Takuichi's carotid artery instead of ending the fight altogether. Without hesitation, he turned his back on the half-hidden mist shinobi, peppering the clearing with throwing daggers, and unleashed his flash sword technique. In a blur of motion, Nathan vanished in a silver arc and reappeared at Takuichi's flank, blade raised for the finishing strike. Nathan closed the distance in an instant, appearing before Fukui Takuichi with astonishing speed. He raised his longsword and unleashed a flurry of strikes, combining the illusion sword technique with the shadow sword technique. 6 blades, 3 actual, 3 spectral, swept toward Takuichi from every angle. Takuichi's eyes widened at the oncoming onslaught. Driven by the instinct to survive, he summoned every ounce of reaction speed he had and narrowly evaded 4 of the strikes, 2 real slashes and 2 illusions. But the final blade found its mark. A spray of blood burst from his lips as he was blown backward. With a thunderous crash, Takuichi slammed into the wall behind him, coughed up another mouthful of blood, and crumpled to the ground. He tried to push himself upright again and again, but his strength failed him. Nathan stepped forward, sword poised to deliver the killing blow. Suddenly, a torrent of water exploded beside him, coalescing into the shape of a roaring dragon. Its maw opened wide, teeth glinting, ready to swallow Nathan whole. He barely had time to react as the water dragon lunged from the side. Nathan glimpsed Hasegawa, the Mist Village's special jonin, perched on a nearby rooftop, then slipped away, seeking cover behind a shattered wall. A moment later, a colossal water dragon erupted from Hasegawa's hands and slammed into the street with a thunderous boom. The force of the impact ripped up pavement and sent 2 rows of houses crumbling into dust. Clouds of debris and smoke billowed upward, obscuring everything. Safe behind the wreckage, Nathan exhaled, relieved to have dodged the attack. Hasegawa, however, showed no surprise. He'd long since grown accustomed to Nathan's evasions. Turning his sharp gaze, Hasegawa scanned the battlefield for his next target, Fukui Takuichi. Then, without warning, a slender column of water shot through the swirling dust and struck Fukui squarely in the chest. He staggered backward, a spray of blood bursting from his mouth. His eyes widened with shock and despair as he sank to his knees, clutching at the phantom pillar protruding from his body. But before his trembling fingers could close around it, the water vanished, leaving only a gaping wound. Blood spurted like a broken fountain, pooling beneath Fukui's bowed head. His lifeblood seeped into the cracks in the street as he slumped forward, the light draining from his eyes. In an instant, the clash of jutsu had claimed its toll. Within moments, a deep crimson pool spread across the floor. When Hasegawa took in the grisly sight, his face went ashen with horror. Chapter 616, The Last One. When the acrid smoke finally cleared, Nathan stood at the edge of the battlefield, lowering his arms as the last ripples of his water release technique dissolved into mist. The towering column of water he'd just unleashed had knocked him backward, but he wasted no time recovering. With a sharp intake of breath, he channeled his chakra again and unleashed water release. Water break wave, its torrent striking from afar and instantly obliterating Fukui Takuichi. He spared a glance for Hasegawa's twisted expression, but felt neither pity nor hesitation. By his side, a longsword jutted out from the ground where someone had fallen. Nathan seized its hilt, chakra flaring green around him as he activated his instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared at Hasegawa's flank, blade poised to strike. Only one enemy remained of the three who had ambushed him, and Nathan intended to end them all now. As he raced forward, several mist shinobi leapt in to block his path, spinning kunai and daggers in a desperate bid to delay him. Nathan weaved through their assaults effortlessly, his focus fixed entirely on Hasegawa. The latter, however, did not flee. Planting his feet firmly in the mud, he brought his hands together in a rapid seal sequence. Water coalesced around him, forming thick, spear-like jets as wide as an arm. With a vicious thrust of his arms, he launched them at Nathan like javelins. Steel clashed with water in a battle that would decide the fate of the last opponent standing. Nathan spun his Sharingan into action, effortlessly tracking every water bullet assault before twisting his body to dodge out of the way. The torrents of pressurized water might have overwhelmed an average shinobi, but they posed no real threat to him. He barely lost momentum as he descended the stairs, eyes locked on Hasegawa, who hovered above on the rooftop. With a sudden, explosive stomp, Nathan launched himself skyward like a cannonball. He channeled his strength through the wooden beams beneath him, propelling into a soaring leap that brought him squarely before Hasegawa in mere seconds. Too soon, in fact, for him to cast another ninjutsu. Recognizing this, Hasegawa leaned back and created distance, bracing himself for Nathan's next move. Instead of pressing the attack, Nathan's gaze drifted downward. His pupils narrowed as he took in the finely carved seals etched into the rooftop boards. One more step, and he'd trigger whatever trap lay hidden in those patterns. He halted mid-stride, realization and caution warring in his expression. Nathan's heart skipped a beat the moment he recognized the pattern etched on the rooftop. This wasn't a simple trap, it was a sealing formation. Though its runes were crude and clearly drawn in haste, any sealing jutsu commanded respect. Power of that nature lay at the very core of ninja arts, and Nathan refused to step into it without understanding exactly what it could do. Across the tiles, Hasegawa watched Nathan halt in his tracks, a flash of frustration crossing his face. He'd hoped to see the formation lock down its target, and now the chance to test its strength was slipping away. Without warning, Hasegawa loosed a handful of kunai. They sliced through the air toward Nathan with a metallic hiss and a faint glow. Nathan's Sharingan eyes spun into life. He spotted the detonating talismans wrapped around each blade. Rather than attempt a parry, he sidestepped with fluid precision, his feet barely grazing the rooftop surface. Simultaneously, he wove a pair of hand seals and called forth earth-style, hardening technique. His skin rippled, crystallizing into a sturdy, rock-like armor. No sooner had the earth chakra set than he formed another seal, invoking chakra feather cloak. A diaphanous mantle of blue-white energy fluttered around him, ready to absorb impact. The kunai struck moments later, exploding against the tiles where Nathan had stood. A shockwave of dust and debris tore through the air, rattling the rooftop, but Nathan remained untouched, his dual defenses holding firm. Ready and unshaken, he faced Hasegawa, preparing for whatever came next. The blast hit in an instant, a flash of flame followed by a thunderous crack, and Nathan was slammed backward by the shockwave. He tumbled across the rooftop, skidding to a halt just inches from the ledge. Heart racing, he righted himself and wiped soot from his brow. Through the haze, he spotted Hasegawa moving away, edging toward the far side of the roof, as if to make good his escape. "Running already? Nice try," Nathan muttered, sheathing his long sword with a sharp click. He lifted his hands and wove the familiar hand seals in a blur of motion. Fire style, Phoenix fire technique. At his command, dozens, no, hundreds of blazing fireballs shot from his mouth like burning projectiles. They streaked across the night sky, homing in on Hasegawa. Cornered several yards from the edge, Hasegawa had no choice but to spin away and crouch under the assault. He scrambled backward, trying desperately to widen the gap between them. His skill in close combat was nowhere near Nathan's, and he dared not risk a direct confrontation. Instead, he fled, back, toward the rooftop's edge, hoping to slip out of reach before Nathan could close in. Hasegawa's plan had been simple: play the bait, draw Nathan in close, and then seal him within the formation. But the trap had already failed. Now he had to put as much distance between them as possible. Every second bought him a chance for reinforcements to arrive. He knew he couldn't beat Nathan in a straight fight. His only hope was to stall. He unleashed a volley of fireballs, lobbing them one after another at Nathan's position. But Nathan was too quick. Each orb of flame fizzled harmlessly as he sidestepped with effortless grace. Realizing the fire tactic was useless, Hasegawa pivoted to Plan B without a moment's hesitation. Wind style, wind blade. Nathan's voice rang out, crisp and controlled. A translucent blade of compressed air, just under half a meter long, materialized and lashed toward Hasegawa at blinding speed. Taken by surprise, Hasegawa caught only a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. He sensed the coming strike, dropped into a crouch and rolled to the side. The wind blade screamed over his head, embedding itself in the building's outer wall with a shower of stone fragments. Dust and debris rained down as Hasegawa sprang back, heart racing. He pressed his back against the shattered wall, eyes locked on Nathan, and cranked his legs, determined to carve out every possible inch of distance before the next attack. Even from that distance, the blade gouged a deep furrow in the wood. Had it struck Hasegawa himself, it would have sliced him in two. But it missed. Realizing his opponent's sensory prowess, Nathan halted his chakra flow and abandoned any further ninjutsu. Instead, he swept up the longsword lying at his side and surged forward. Before closing in, he unleashed a few fireballs with the fire release, Phoenix Blaze technique, directing them at the roof overhead. The resulting explosions shattered several ceiling talismans, neutralizing the barrier's power. With no fear of the formation activating beneath his feet, Nathan simply sprinted in a straight line, closing the gap in an instant. Hasegawa, momentarily stunned by the collapsing seal above him, recovered just in time to see Nathan hurtling toward him with a raised sword. He planted his feet, gripped a kunai, and lifted it to block the oncoming strike. Ding! Metal rang out sharply as Nathan's blade clashed against the kunai, the dull echo of steel on steel marking the beginning of their deadly exchange. Nathan's sword looked unassuming, no ornate hilt, no exotic alloys, yet its power was unmistakable. With a single fluid strike, he sent Hasegawa hurtling off his feet. The younger ninja flew across the rooftop, crashing through tiles before plummeting to the courtyard below. Before Hasegawa could regain his bearings, Nathan had already drawn and thrown a shuriken. His hands moved in a blur of seals, nailing chakra into the blade. Instantly, the metal split into dozens of shadowy copies, then hundreds, each one streaking toward his airborne opponent like falling daggers. Caught in midair, Hasegawa had nothing solid to brace against. Desperate, he called upon the Kaorimi no Jutsu, the substitute technique. In a cloud of smoke, he vanished, leaving behind a wooden log. But substitution alone couldn't evade every attack. When the smoke cleared, Hasegawa reappeared in a dim corner of the courtyard, several shurikens already buried in his torso. He slumped to one knee, pain hot and sharp as he pressed trembling fingers against the wicked points. Blood oozed between his fingers, and he fought to pull himself upright, but his strength betrayed him. Then a sudden chill slithered down his spine, a familiar, oppressive chakra signature closing in. Gritting his teeth, he forced his head around. Standing in the shadows was Nathan, expression unreadable beneath the moonlight. For a heartbeat, Hasegawa hesitated. Then, steeling himself against the knife edge of fear, he made his choice. Nathan stood in silence as a detonating talisman materialized in his palm, its runes flaring to life. The curved blade of his long sword slid soundlessly back into its scabbard. He watched the talisman ignite. Then, just before it could detonate, his target's head erupted skyward in a crimson arc. With a swift glance at the burning talisman still clutched in his hand, Nathan vanished in a blur. A moment later, a thunderous boom shattered the air. Hasegawa's body was obliterated in the blast, scattering flesh and bone across the ground. Amid the wreckage, a single smoldering arm thudded onto the dirt. Nathan's eyes twitched at the sight, but he remained as still and silent as ever. Chapter 617, Short of Money. Captain. a mist-hidden ninja burst onto the scene, eyes fixed on Hasegawa's half-finished corpse. His shout drew several more mist chunin, who instantly formed a circle around Nathan. Nathan barely spared them a glance, but that glance was enough to confirm that these were the same shinobi who had tried to intercept him after he slew Fukui Takuichi and Hasegawa. Back then, their pursuit had been in vain. By the time they caught up, Hasegawa was already dead. They clearly still underestimated him. Exchanging determined looks, the chunin charged. Kunai hissed through the air from every direction, their steel points aimed straight at his heart. To them, this was a lethal assault. To Nathan, it was barely a nuisance. He didn't bother dodging. With a casual flick of his wrist, he sent 2 kunai spinning harmlessly into the dirt. Another 3 he caught mid-flight and tossed back so precisely that they clattered at the attacker's feet. The remaining missiles drifted wide as if drawn off by an invisible force. The chunin faltered, shock on their faces. They realized too late that they were far outmatched. But before any of them could recover, Nathan closed the distance in a heartbeat. He moved like lightning, each step a blur, neutralizing threats with effortless precision. A single finger flick was enough to disable the nearest ninja. A palm strike sent another reeling into a gust of dust. Within seconds, the circle had shattered. The mist-hidden chunin lay sprawled on the ground, groaning and clutching bruised ribs. Nathan stood alone in the center, unscathed and utterly unhurried. He looked down at the wreckage of kunai around his feet and shrugged. Short on money, short on patience. Apparently, they were even short on sense. Turning away, Nathan stepped over Hasegawa's body and vanished into the shadows, leaving confusion and a bruised band of chunin behind. Nathan's eyes flicked over the incoming kunai, instantly plotting their flight paths. A subtle glint along the blades revealed the real danger. Several were rigged with explosive tags, meant to detonate against his guard. He shook his head in mild amusement, then flicked his wrist, sending a small but precise volley of kunai whistling back at the throwers. Ting, ting. Each of Nathan's blades struck a booby-trapped kunai dead on, redirecting the explosives back toward the mist ninjas. Boom, boom, boom. 3 thunderous detonations ripped through the clearing, flames and shrapnel bursting among the would-be ambushers. They'd hoped to ensnare him, but instead they'd triggered their own downfall. Before the smoke could clear, Nathan's longsword traced a swift arc, parrying the handful of knives still speeding toward him. Then, in the blink of an eye, he vanished from sight. Moments later, he reappeared directly in front of a startled Kirigakure chunin. Ah! The chunin gasped, leaping backward in shock. But as he lifted his right foot to flee, a sudden wave of dizziness swept over him. His vision blurred, and he realized too late that he'd stumbled into Nathan's carefully laid illusion. Nathan faced the 3 Kirigakure chunin with chilling calm. In the moment their eyes met his, he wove a subtle genjutsu, seizing control of their senses. With barely a sound, he vanished and reappeared behind the first shinobi. His blade flashed in the moonlight, slicing through flesh. Though the illusion shattered the instant he struck, the wound was already fatal. The chunin's futile grasp at his severed throat was the only sign he'd ever been truly aware of what was coming. Before the second could even blink, Nathan phased out again and materialized at his back. That kunai the chunin raised to block the blow did nothing to stop Nathan's left hand, where a glowing orb of pale blue chakra swirled into being. With crushing force, he slammed it into the man's chest. A single, sickening crack echoed as ribs shattered. The chunin keeled over, blood bubbling at his lips, and flew backward like a broken puppet. Shuriken hissed through the air, from the shadows, but Nathan danced around them with uncanny grace. In one fluid motion, he crossed the distance to his third opponent and cut him down before the stones even reached him. 3 chunin lay silent at his feet, each dispatched in the blink of an eye. It didn't take long for Nathan to cut down his opponents. He moved through the Kirigakure shinobi like a wolf among sheep, swift, merciless, unstoppable. After dispatching the third foe, he pressed on toward the fourth. By the time he readied the killing blow on his 7th adversary, an unnatural fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. "Mist-hidden technique?" he murmured, recognition flashing in his eyes. Without hesitation, he formed the hand seals. Wind style, great breakthrough. A ferocious gale burst from his lips, shredding the fog in an instant and restoring his sight. But before he could gauge the battlefield, a blinding bolt of lightning snapped across his vision. Nathan's world went white. He clenched his eyes shut, yet the searing afterimage still burned behind his lids. This was no ordinary flash. It carried an illusory sting that rattled the mind itself. Even his iron will wavered as dizziness swept over him, and he staggered on unsteady feet, momentarily trapped in the electric mirage. Just as Nathan wondered what kind of ninjutsu had just been unleashed and whether he could replicate it himself, a faint whistle split the air. He froze for a heartbeat, traced the sound's direction, and then sprang away. Anticipating hidden explosive tags or follow-up traps, he bounded back in a series of agile leaps, distancing himself from his original position. His caution was justified. No sooner had he cleared the spot than a volley of violent detonations ripped through the area, followed by a crushing shockwave that knocked dust and debris into the sky. Nathan tumbled backward, eyes squeezed shut until he could see again, only to find two glinting threads of steel wire coiled around his ankles. He looked up to spot Kirigakure's special jonin flanking him on either side. Each had launched a monofilament line, intending to snare his legs, pin him in place, and rob him of any chance to flee. But their reflexes had been just a shade too slow. As the wires cinched tight, Nathan planted his feet and braced himself, ready to turn their own trap into his escape. Nathan reacted instinctively the moment he spotted the steel wires snapping toward him. He sprinted forward, vaulted over a low rubble pile, and landed several paces away on a crumbling wall, buying himself just enough distance to regroup. Seconds later, 3 kunai streaked out of the smoke. Nathan recognized the telltale shimmer of explosive tags on each blade. Without pausing, he gathered an equal number of kunai in hand and flung them in a tight arc. The returning kunai clanged against their targets, triggering muffled explosions that rattled the wall beneath him but left him unscathed. Clearing the dust with a quick glance, Nathan made out 2 shinobi emerging at the edge of the blast zone, both clad in the dark garb of Kirigakure's elite. By their chakra signatures, he knew only one was a full jonin. The other was a special jonin, the same one who'd launched the explosive kunai. The true jonin, he recalled with a jolt, was the ninja who'd unleashed that crackling bolt of lightning moments ago. Flanked on both sides by 2 more special jonin, Nathan realized these 4 were the latest operatives dispatched by Kirigakure Command to eliminate him. The air crackled with tension as they closed in. This ambush was far from over. 1 jonin and 3 special jonin. Nathan shook his head, not because their skill level was lacking. They demonstrated impressive coordination just moments ago, but because 4 shinobi, however talented, stood no real chance of taking him down. In fact, they'd be risking their own lives. He'd been prowling this battlefield for weeks, carving a path through enemy ranks, and the hidden mist had surely gathered intelligence on him. Based on his recent exploits, a squad of this size cells imply couldn't stop him. He refused to believe the mist leadership was unaware of that fact. The only conclusion was that they lacked reinforcements. Between the protracted war of attrition and Konoha's last counter-encirclement, where they'd used him as bait, the hidden mist had suffered heavy losses. Now, strained by emergencies on multiple fronts, they could spare only 1 jonin and 3 special jonin to deal with him. Still, that was good news for Konoha and their allies. All Nathan had to do now was hold these 4 at bay, giving the 3 flanking teams room to surge forward. Once they broke through, the battlefield would come into focus. Thoughts raced through his mind, but he gave himself no time to hesitate. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged at the nearest opponent. Chapter 618, Rapid Advancement. Nathan surged forward without a second thought. The moment he locked eyes with Heimukwan, the jonin of the Mist Village, he signaled his team and leapt into action. Steel rang out as their blades met in a flurry of sparks. Holding his long sword like an extension of his arm, Nathan struck with ghost-like speed. Heimukwan countered gracefully, spinning and tossing kunai with pinpoint accuracy, each defense neutralizing Nathan's fiercest blows. Judging by his fluid movements and tactical precision, Nathan realized this opponent was no ordinary jonin. His skills in taijutsu, kenjutsu, and weaponry were all top tier, even surpassing the 3 special jonins Nathan had faced earlier in the campaign. Under different circumstances, a one-on-one duel would have ended in Nathan's favor. But he wasn't alone in this fight. 3 missed special jonins held positions just beyond the clearing, their eyes flicking between the 2 warriors for the first opening to strike. Nathan pressed on regardless, confident in the strategy he'd set in motion. He recalled the diversion he'd orchestrated hours ago, sending a contingent to raid the Konoha camp farther down the docks. The missed forces in Iojin port had been stretched to the breaking point, desperately short-handed in elite fighters. Now, only a handful of high-level shinobi remained to defend the port. Every second Nathan prolonged this duel, the more fatigued and vulnerable the enemy would become. Taking a steadying breath, Nathan summoned his resolve. He'd chip away at their defenses, 1 jonin at a time, until the mist village's strongest in Iojin port were no more than tired memories. And when the dust settled, the tide of battle would have irrevocably turned in Konoha's favor. Nathan had already taken 3 lives. His duty was done. There was no reason to waste every ounce of his strength finishing off the 4 opponents facing him now. His new objective was simply to keep them occupied. This was a war, not a one-man show, and he couldn't do it all himself. Others needed to play their part if they stood any chance of victory. He'd never pledged himself fanatically to Konoha. He wasn't about to throw himself recklessly into danger. With that in mind, Nathan's fighting style softened. He dialed back his relentless offense and slipped into a defensive rhythm. Kuroki Izumi and the 3 Kirigakure special ninjas paused, confused by his sudden shift, but they weren't about to let the opportunity slip away. They launched themselves forward in a barrage of coordinated attacks. Eyes sharp, ears attuned to every whisper of chakra, Nathan tracked their strikes and calculated their angles. With calm precision, he met each assault, parrying, sidestepping, and countering in turn. As the clash wore on, a subtle advantage began to tilt his way. By tempering his aggression and honing his defenses, Nathan found the extra edge he'd been missing when he was all offense and no restraint. Nathan's extraordinary physical fitness, coupled with the deadly insight of his Sharingan, let him seize any opening and strike with unerring precision, no matter the odds. Yet, every strength casts a shadow. His relentless focus on offense had sharpened his attacks to perfection, but in doing so, he'd neglected his defense, leaving it weaker than that of the average shinobi. For someone as perfectionistic as Nathan, this was an unacceptable flaw. He hadn't recognized it before, but as his tactics evolved, the weakness became impossible to ignore. The 4 opponents arrayed before him were only of average skill, hardly a challenge, but that offered no guarantee the next enemies he faced would be so forgiving. Determined to prepare for every eventuality, Nathan resolved to shore up his defensive experience. With that decision made, he banished the doubt from his mind and refocused on the fight. He dialed back the ferocity of his assaults, slipping into a tighter, more guarded stance as he prepared for whatever came next. Nathan's focus narrowed as the battle raged around him, his mind instinctively shutting out every distraction but the fight itself. 30 minutes passed in what felt like seconds. Nathan and Kuroki Izumi were locked in combat with a handful of Kirigakure shinobi when a thunderous explosion echoed nearby. Nathan snapped his head toward the blast, and his heart skipped a beat at the sight of reinforcements pouring in. The very Konoha Jonin who had launched the initial assault on Yujin port, led by their veteran interim captain, and several mid-level shinobi trailing in their wake. They had breached Kirigakure's outer defenses and were now streaming into the port. Kuroki Izumi and the surrounding Kirigakure forces, spotting the fresh enemy wave, began to fall back toward the second line of defense. Nathan saw their retreat and refused to let such an opportunity slip by. In an instant, he invoked his signature instant sword technique, vanishing in a heartbeat to close the gap on a Kirigakure special jonin, an enemy untrained for close-quarters dueling. The whisper of steel sliced through the air. Nathan lunged forward, blade flashing toward his opponent's face. The Kirigakure special jonin barely had time to react, yanking his kunai up just in time. Clang! Steel rang against steel as Nathan drove the jonin's weapon aside and forced him back with a clean, powerful chop. But he didn't pause. Darting to the side, Nathan weaved between a hail of kunai and shuriken thrown by Kuroki Izumi and another Kirigakure Jonin closing in behind him. He pressed his advantage, sprinting straight for the first Jonin. Sensing Nathan's deadly intent, his foe tossed his remaining kunai to one side and kicked off the ground, gaining distance as he backed away. Nathan's eyes narrowed. With a swift hand seal, he invoked the shadow clone technique. In an instant, a wisp of chakra smoke billowed into the air, and standing where he had been was an identical Nathan, ready to engage. The clone veered off to intercept Kuroki Izumi and the pursuing Jonin, buying the real Nathan the precious seconds he needed to zero in on his original target. Nathan wasn't especially athletic. Even though he'd been blasted backward by the force of that last sword strike, he'd managed to close the gap again in seconds. In fact, during their previous skirmish, when he'd been strictly on the defensive, he'd studied the 4 Kirigakure operatives closely, learning each of their fighting patterns. Now, as he swung in beside this particular shinobi, his Sharingan flared to life. The momentary insight it granted was all he needed. He drove his blade home and left a glancing wound across the man's torso. Pain knotted the ninja's movements, and Nathan took full advantage. He surged forward, unleashing a rapid flurry of sword strikes, some real, some illusory, until the special ninja's vision couldn't discern truth from trick. The assault was relentless, each phantom slash more disorienting than the last. Then, as the Kirigakure shinobi reeled, Nathan abruptly sheathed his sword. He closed the final few feet at a dead run and halted in front of his stunned opponent. In one fluid motion, he raised his left hand. A dense orb of chakra spun into form above his palm, glowing with lethal intensity. Before the ninja could react, Nathan slammed it against his chest. The shinobi's eyes widened in horror. A blast of agony tore through him, and he bent double, blood bubbling up with an involuntary gasp. Puffman, he spat out a mouthful of crimson, collapsing to one knee under the weight of Nathan's jutsu. The fight, for now, was decisively over. The special Jonin from Kirigakure looked down at Nathan, who was clutching his chest with his right hand. The Jonin's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Nathan's ears suddenly pricked, as though he'd caught the faintest sound on the breeze. In an instant, he rolled to the side, clearing the spot just before a kunai whistled past and buried itself where he had been standing. A sizzling crackle followed. The detonating talisman tied to the kunai's tail was burning fiercely. Chapter 619, Stay Boom. A colossal explosion ripped through the clearing. Where Nathan had just stood, a fireball blossomed, incinerating the Kirigakure special Jonin who'd been charging at him. The shinobi, already gravely wounded, didn't stand a chance. He was obliterated in an instant. Nathan, who'd narrowly evaded the blast, froze in horror. So merciless, he whispered, eyes following the trail of the kunai that had triggered the explosion. Across the battlefield, Kuroki Izumi and 2 other Kirigakure special Jonin regrouped. Izumi had freed herself from Nathan's shadow clone, and it was her deft throw that had unleashed the fiery trap. She heard Nathan's exclamation, but betrayed no emotion. Without pausing, she flicked several more kunai in quick succession, aiming for the clone's joints and edges. The shadow clone, its form flickering under assault, twisted out of the way, baring its teeth in a silent snarl. Sensing an opening, the 2 other Jonin likewise shrugged off the clone's tendrils. Together, they readied themselves to dash toward Kirigakure's second line of defense, intent on regrouping and mounting another assault. But Nathan wasn't about to let them slip away. He sprang forward, eyes blazing, as shadowy tendrils burst from the ground at his command. The fleeing shinobi stumbled as the tendrils coiled around their ankles, yanking them to a sudden halt. Izumi's next kunai clattered harmlessly to the earth as she fought to free herself. "This ends now," Nathan growled. His hand crackled with chakra as he formed the seals for a new jutsu. The air around him thickened, shadows pooling like ink at his feet. He launched himself at the bound trio, determined to finish what he'd started before they could regroup deeper in Kirigakure's defenses. Above the stifled cries and the rattling of restraints, Nathan's voice rang out, "Stay where you are." In that moment, any thought of retreat vanished, and the battle reached its tipping point. Nathan knew that every moment he could buy himself mattered. If he stalled long enough for the other Konoha Jonin to arrive, the 3 mist ninjas stationed at Yujin Port would be forced to stand their ground. Those 3 jonin were no minor threat, and whether the mist sent reinforcements or simply gave up on the port, Nathan's side would profit. If Konoha dispatched troops, the mist could ambush them before they even reached the Kirigakure defenses, cutting off reinforcements without a direct assault and keeping their casualties low. If Konoha abandoned the mission, it only weakened Kirigakure's front line further. Either way, the mist could then resume their tactic of picking off Kirigakure's forces bit by bit, slowly choking off Yujin Port until it was theirs. All Nathan had to do was hold the line. With that strategy clear in his mind, he and his shadow clone launched themselves at the 3 mist warriors. They were already close enough that distance would not slow them down. Now it was a race against time, and Nathan intended to win. Nathan had decided to strike back, and he chose his target carefully. A veteran jonin stood just inside Kirigakure's second defensive perimeter, the perfect bottleneck for Kuroki Izumi and her squad. If he could cut them off here, they'd have no clear route back to their lines. But Nathan's plan hit a snag almost immediately. A cluster of mid- and low-ranked Kiri shinobi, many ordered to hold their ground, some unwilling to fall back, surged around him, forming a living barrier. They jabbed taunts and brandished weapons, determined to keep him away from Izumi. Nathan's eyes flicked over the circle of opponents. Without a word, he snapped his hands into seals and drew in chakra. Fire style, Phoenix fire technique, he roared, exhaling a hail of brilliant fireballs. They burst from his mouth like scorching bullets, filling the clearing with heat and light. Watch out! Get back! He's attacking! A ripple of panic ran through the Kiri ranks as the fireballs slammed into the earth and each other. Those quick enough, particularly the Chunin, twisted aside, shields raised, or leapt out of the blast zone. In the end, most suffered only singed clothing or minor burns. The rest stumbled back, coughing, as Nathan's assault cleared a wide swath around him. Breathing steadily, Nathan readied himself for the next move. The path to Kuroki Izumi, and the crucial jonin behind her, was finally opening. Those who reacted too slowly suffered devastating blows, strikes to vital points that, even if they didn't kill, left the shinobi grievously wounded. Agonized cries soon filled the training ground as several Kirigakure genin, unable to dodge in time, were struck squarely in the head or chest. Nathan wasn't finished. His Sharingan whirled as he sidestepped a flurry of kunai and locked onto a Chunin trying to flank him. Forming the necessary hand seals, he unleashed fire style, Crimson Blaze. In an instant, the man's uniform erupted in flames, his scream ripping through the air as a roaring fireball consumed him. Before anyone could recover, Nathan sent 2 more fireballs streaking forward, igniting 2 more shinobi in rapid succession. One after another, 5 of his opponents were scorched by merciless fire. The surrounding mist ninjas froze, their assault faltering in stunned silence. Nathan let out a cold snort and turned his gaze toward Kuroki Izumi and her companions. They had tried to slip away while he was occupied, but his shadow clone had already ensnared them, leaving them no route of escape. Earlier, the enemy had been able to dispel the shadow clone almost at once. After all, its sole purpose was to buy Nathan enough time to take down the Mist's special jonin. It wasn't meant to endure a prolonged fight. But Nathan had quietly altered its instructions, stalled just long enough for him to unleash a few jutsu. That small change unleashed the clone's latent power, allowing it to pin down Kuroki Izumi and her squad. Yet every advantage carries a cost. In its rush to seize control of the skirmish, the clone overreached, and Kuroki Izumi seized her moment. Sidestepping past 2 stunned shinobi, she drove a kunai deep into the clone's back. The impact ruptured its form. With a sharp pop, the clone collapsed into a sphere of dissipating chakra, vanishing as its memories snapped back into Nathan's mind. Standing on the battlefield, Nathan took stock. Kuroki Izumi and her teammates recovered rapidly, and several Konoha jonin were already closing in from the rear. He drew his blade in a single fluid motion and lunged forward, the air shimmering as he unleashed a blinding flashblade technique. Kuroki and her allies, having squandered their best chance to flee, braced themselves. There was no escape now but to face Nathan head-on. The clash of steel rang out again across the clearing as Nathan moved like a ghost, his strikes coming so fast and fluid that the three Kirigakure shinobi before him could neither focus on defense nor slip away one by one. He kept them all in check, each attack with equal intensity, so that none could break free. Around them, the other Kirigakure warriors formed a tight ring, but none dared intervene. They were simply outmatched. If they joined now, they'd only sow confusion, or worse, get in each other's way. So they stood back and watched. It didn't last long. A breath later, orders from the Kirigakure commander swept through their ranks. The leading ninjas stiffened, ears twitching to catch every word. Then, as one, they reformed their lines and sprinted off the field, rushing to meet the Konoha army that was advancing in the distance. Not only did that first wave break ranks, the Kirigakure ninja from the second line of defense also streamed out, splitting into two groups. One surged toward the main Konoha army, the other charged straight at Nathan and the Konoha Jonin who'd closed in on them. It was clear the Kirigakure commander had chosen a rescue mission. Rather than let Kuroki Izumi and her team be cut down or slowly exhausted, he preferred an all-out fight with swords and guns. In a way, this worked to Konoha's advantage. By fronting the enemy in the open instead of pressing deeper into Kirigakure's secondary defenses, they avoided any hidden traps or ambushes, greatly simplifying the battle. That left Nathan under the greatest pressure. If Kirigakure had abandoned Izumi and the others, he could have waited for more Jonin to arrive and trapped the three of them. Now, with several Konoha Jonin stalled in their advance, he was forced to hold off Kuroki Izumi's squad single-handedly. The risk was undeniably higher, but Nathan welcomed the challenge. Nathan paused, recalling he'd been circling these woods for the last half hour, and that his opponents were already down one man. A thought struck him. Through his Sharingan, he'd noticed a few subtle details earlier, weaknesses he might exploit. If he played his cards right, he could finish this quickly. With that in mind, Nathan let his Sharingan flare to life and focused intently on the three figures before him. Chapter 620. Quick Decision. Clang, clang. Nathan pushed both of his three Tomo Sharingan to their limit, carefully tracking the three opponents arrayed before him. At the perfect moment, he slipped back, narrowly evading the kunai that Kuroki Izumi lunged at his throat. Before Izumi could recover, Nathan spun forward and slashed his blade in a brutal arc, aiming straight for Izumi's chest. Kuroki-kwan cast a quick glance to his left and right. Seeing that his two backup teammates were too far away to intervene, he dropped his own kunai and stepped in to block Nathan's strike. The clash of steel rang out with a shower of sparks as blade met kunai. Overwhelmed by the force, Kwan staggered back, loosening his guard. Nathan pressed his advantage without hesitation. Another fierce swing followed. Instantly, Kuroki-kwan raised his kunai again, meeting Nathan's blade with a resounding clang. The fierce echo of metal on metal rang across the battlefield. Nathan unleashed the same overwhelming force through his kunai. Mukwan, already bruised and out of breath from their last exchange, couldn't hold his ground this time. The kunai struck with brutal precision, and Mukwan was driven back. A spark of triumph lit Nathan's eyes as he took a decisive step forward and slashed again. Clang, clang, clang. Mukwan managed to parry all three blows, but the sheer power behind them was too much. He staggered and was hurled clear across the clearing. Gasping for air, he collapsed to one knee. Nathan didn't pause to gloat. He slipped away, darting into the shadows at the edge of the mist. In that instant, a Kirigakure special Jonin lunged forward, hurling a kunai at Nathan's fading silhouette, and buried it in the spot where Nathan had just been. Seizing the opening, another special Jonin hurled a volley of shuriken at Nathan's next presumed location. But Nathan's Sharingan spun to life, locking onto every deadly projectile. With a single fluid motion, he drew his blade and deflected each shuriken in turn. No sooner had the last one flown harmlessly aside than he snapped his sword back into its sheath. Fingers flew through a series of seals, and Nathan called upon his ninjutsu. Water release, water breaking wave. A towering wall of turbulent water roared into being, surging straight toward Kuroki Izumi and the others. With a sharp slender jets of high-pressure water shot from Nathan's mouth like liquid blades, slicing a wide arc before him. But Kuroki Izumi and the others, having faced this very attack against Fukuita Kuichi, were ready. They dove aside the moment the water jets erupted, simultaneously throwing off their own advance. Seizing the opening, Nathan whirled toward the nearest Kirigakure special jonin and unleashed a second jutsu, fire release, roast meat technique. His hands moved in a blur, sealing the technique before anyone could guess his plan. The jonin caught only a glimpse of Nathan's unwavering glare and flinched, rolling to the right. Nathan's lips curled into a cold smile. Seeing that predatory look, Sugiyama Daichi's blood ran cold. He spun to flee in another direction, but before he could take a step, it was too late. A thunderous explosion cracked the air. A blazing sphere materialized at Sugiyama's feet, instantly setting his uniform alight. In an instant, flames raced up his legs and swallowed him in searing heat. Ah! Sugiyama Daichi's agonized scream cut through the chaos as the fire consumed him. Nathan unleashed a torrent of flame, pouring nearly 1,000 points of chakra into his fire release, baking technique. From the outset, his ninjutsu outmatched Sugiyama Daichi's countermeasures. The Kirigakure Chunin strove repeatedly to snuff out the inferno clinging to Nathan's arms and chest, but each attempt only stalled the blaze for a heartbeat, forcing him to endure scorching pain instead of dousing it. Nathan's success wasn't merely a show of raw power, it was a calculated strike. While sparring with Kuroki Izumi and the others, he'd observed a telling quirk in Sugiyama's fighting style. Whenever confronted with an unfamiliar attack, the special jonin instinctively veered to his right. Seizing on that pattern, Nathan feigned a frontal assault and channeled his jutsu at an angle that matched Sugiyama's trained dodge. Under normal circumstances, a shinobi of Sugiyama's caliber, ever vigilant to the slightest hint of danger, would never be caught in the flames if he responded correctly. But habits die hard. By the time Sugiyama's heightened senses registered the true trajectory of the fire, it was already too late. The inferno lapped hungrily at his right flank, and Nathan watched grimly as the flames refused to be quelled. His plan had worked perfectly, turning a small, overlooked habit into a decisive advantage. "Nathan!" one of the Kirigakure special jonin shouted as Sugiyama Daichi was suddenly engulfed in roaring flames. Reacting on instinct, he threw up his hand and formed a seal, preparing a water-based ninjutsu to douse the fire. But Nathan had already anticipated his ally's rescue attempt. With a quick sidestep, he evaded a kunai hurled at him by Izumi Kuroki and immediately shaped his own hand seals in midair. "Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique," he roared. In an instant, a swarm of incendiary spheres, each glowing like a smoldering seed, erupted around him. Obeying his every thought, they streaked toward Izumi and the would-be savior about to cast the water spell. Caught off guard, the two adversaries could only scramble aside, hand signs faltering. Nathan's Sharingan flared as he meticulously tracked their evasions. Drawing on every scrap of intel gathered in earlier skirmishes, he predicted their next moves and expertly guided his blazing projectiles with surgical precision. The Kirigakure Jonin and Izumi twisted, ducked, and spun to avoid the assault, sweat beading on their brows. Yet the Kirigakure shinobi refused to give in. With a rapid succession of seals, he summoned a torrent of water that thundered down onto Sugiyama Daichi. The fire hissed and crackled under the deluge, steam billowing upward in great white clouds. Nathan watched, Sharingan eyes narrowed, as the battle continued to shift in an instant. As Nathan's water jutsu met Sugiyama Daichi's fire attack, a sharp sizzle cut through the air, and Daichi's roar of pain echoed across the battlefield. But Nathan didn't flinch. His focus was entirely on the Kirigakure special jonin in the distance, who was still forming hand seals for his own technique. With lightning speed, Nathan shifted his fingers into a new sequence. Wind release, gale blade. Instantly, a half-meter arc of razor-sharp air materialized at his palm, shimmering like a transparent sword. He thrust it forward, aiming straight for the jonin's throat. "Heads up!" came Haimukwan's urgent shout. The wind blade sliced through flesh with a wet, sickening sound. Blood spurted from a deep gash across the jonin's neck, but instead of decapitation, the man twisted his torso at the last possible moment. Thanks to Haimukwan's warning and his own keen instincts, he evaded the fatal edge by mere centimeters. Nathan bit back a curse at the near miss. No sooner had he refocused on his target then Haimuquan's thrown kunai, its seal humming with explosive energy, whistled past him. Nathan leapt backward, and then, boom, the ground trembled under the blast. Smoke and debris filled the air, but Nathan was already readying his next move. Nathan backed away, hand thrust forward to shield himself from the shockwave and choking smoke unleashed by the detonating talisman. Through the haze, a towering column of water suddenly erupted, aimed squarely at him. Unlike his own water-style water breakwave, this attack was far thicker and far deadlier, relying on pure impact rather than sharp penetration. Without hesitation, Nathan dove sideways, narrowly evading the deluge. Before he could regain his footing, another torrent of water surged toward him. This time he held his ground. Feet sliding back, he raised both hands into a tight seal. Drawing on every ounce of his chakra, he unleashed a powerful ninjutsu, water-style, Great Samadan Jutsu. As an A-rank water technique, the Great Samadan Jutsu specializes in neutralizing rival jutsu, particularly those of the water style. The incoming water column vanished into a whirling maw of swirling water at Nathan's command. His form surged and expanded until his body took on the shape of a massive shark. Riding on the very current he had absorbed, the colossal beast lunged forward, its jaws set on the source of the attack.